Chapter 46:14. Brother Jianghu, take back your luck. Bai Ming Chui Qing, who had been silent all this while, finally opened her mouth. She sneered, I've said it before, a man trapped by love is a stupid donkey. If he doesn't put up a wall, he won't turn back. Your so-called not to fight if you can, is not tenable at all. Dongfang Jianghu glared at Bai Ming Chui Qing and said, in today's battle, the fortune gate will be destroyed, and our 4 families will also suffer heavy losses. Not only will the Immortal Palace benefit, that brat Grand Mist will also benefit. This will greatly affect the future of the hidden Immortal continent. Naturally, we won't fight if we can. Mournful cries of the 6 armies, angry for a beauty. Nangong Tianji looked up and laughed, Xiao Hua, if you fall today, your name will be remembered in the future. The 9th princess and our Nangong family's reputation will be even more resounding. Xiao Hua nodded. This Xiao also thinks so. Xin has done so much for this Xiao, to have the Nangong family and even the 4 families as a wedding gift. This story will definitely be passed down through the ages. As Xiao Hua's voice fell, the Kunlun mirror in Xiao Hua's hand activated. A beam of 9-colored light shone down on the dawn and sunset cliff. 200,000 Fortune Gate's Iron Army charged out in formation, exuding a cold-blooded and stern battle intent. Not to mention the 4 families' patriarchs, even the clouds in the Sea of Clouds were stirred up. Sure enough, it's the capital star formation. The Fortune Gate's Iron Army's reputation is well-deserved. Dongfang Jianghu nodded and praised when he saw the Fortune Gate's disciples forming 2 battle formations. Nangong Tianji sneered, everyone's rumors are ridiculous. What Fortune Gate's Iron Army's disciples are all 5th level and above. It seems like most of them are nascent soul realm cultivators. We're making a big fuss over a minor issue. Isn't that better? Bai Ming Chui Qing laughed. Your Nangong family's prestige will be enhanced by annihilating the Fortune Gate. Nangong Tianji's gaze swept over Bai Ming Chui Qing, and just as he was about to speak, Dongfang Jianghu frowned and said, Tianji, prepare to meet the enemy. Nangong Tianji's heart skipped a beat, and he nodded. Then he waved his hand, and a colorful flag the size of a palm appeared in the air. This colorful flag expanded in the wind, and 2 Nangong words that were embroidered with colorful silk threads appeared on it. As Nangong Tianji breathed out a mouthful of true energy into the flag, 5 colored clouds flew out from the 2 Nangong inscriptions. As the clouds surged, countless bean-sized disciples wearing golden armor rushed out with weapons in their hands. Flag of hidden troops? When Chu narrowed his eyes and looked at the tens of thousands of disciples falling in the air. They turned into the size of an ordinary person and said in a low voice, This is the weapon of the ancient Confucian. I thought it had been lost in the hidden Immortal continent. I didn't expect the 4 great families to still have it. Fellow Taoist, Xiao Hua asked worriedly, how do you feel now? Battle spirit. When Chu's tone was as sharp as sword chi as he said, all the heartache, pity, and regret from before have now turned into battle intent. We'll only know the answer after this battle. That's strange. Xiao Hua said curiously, you still don't know why this happened. It's like looking at flowers in the fog, fishing for the moon in the water. When Chu nodded and said with a smile, let's fight. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. All right, Xiao Hua replied and looked out of Chaomu Cliff again. At this time, the Nangong family's battle team had finished assembling. There were also 200,000 disciples wearing golden armor. Most of them were scholars, and their strength was about the same as the Fortune Gate's battle team. Similar to the Fortune Gate's formation, the 200,000 Nangong family disciples were also divided into a dozen or so smaller formations. In front of each formation, there was a disciple with Grandmaster or Martial Grandmaster Cultivation holding a colorful flag. As these disciples waved their flags, the 200,000 Nangong family disciples slapped their own heads and released their true qi. 1. Although the righteous qi in front of the sunset cliff had already dissipated, the several 100,000 Nangong family disciples activated their cultivation techniques, and a large amount of righteous qi poured down. Rays of light flashed, and inscriptions flowed, and a dozen golden chrysanthemums appeared in the air. These dozen chrysanthemums looked as if they were made by heaven. Every petal and every pattern was resplendent, and a powerful aura surged out. In the air above the Fortune Gates battle team, the air started to vibrate and flow violently. When autumn comes, 8th of the 9th month, when my flower blooms, 100 flowers will die. The incense bursts into the sky, and the entire city is covered in golden armor. The poetic words formed a killing intent that pounced towards the Fortune Gates disciples. The 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples in front of them were naturally not the 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples that had swept through the Thousand Demons' sacred grounds, nor were they the 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples that had fought against the devil race in the ancient ruins. However, among these 200,000 disciples, 10,000 of them were the Fortune Gates disciples that had swept through the Thousand Demons' sacred grounds. When they saw the Nangong family's disciples charging towards them, they had already given the order. The battle intent of the heavenly star formation soared to the sky as they faced the enemy head-on. Although the 400,000 disciples had yet to clash, the wind and clouds above the morning sky cliff had already changed. Layers of dark clouds formed in the sky, and tornadoes tore the dark clouds apart. A heavy pressure that could destroy a city gradually formed. The Fortune Gates disciples are indeed powerful. Nangong Tianji's face turned solemn as he said in a low voice, "Although they are not as miraculous as the legends say, they are evenly matched with my Nangong family's battle team." After this battle, that Nangong Tianji stopped talking and didn't say anything else. Beside him, Baiming Choqing laughed loudly and said, "Brother Tianji, you are too stingy. Although today is a matter of our 4 great clans, it is also a good thing for your Jingyin. If you don't contribute, who will? However, seeing that our 4 great clans are one, how can my Baiming family stand idly by when the Nangong family is facing the enemy?" Baiming Choqing roared and took out a bronze arrow from her waist. She threw it into the air and shouted, "You, come out and meet the enemy." When the command arrow landed in the air, the blood-red clouds surged and the sound of war drums rang out from the command arrow. As the war drums rang out, the command arrow expanded rapidly. Groups of Baiming family disciples in light blue armor charged out from the command arrow with weapons in their hands. "Garrison order." When Chu revealed the origin of the arrow and said with a smile, "It seems like the 4 great clans are also taking out their trump cards. The previous Hidden Troops flag and the current garrison order are both ancient military saint artifacts that have been lost since ancient times. I didn't expect them to appear together today. No wonder Immortal Emperor Go-Chin is worried about the 4 great clans." Chapter 46:15. Xiao Hua snorted and said indifferently, "It's just a temporary imperial artifact. How can it be compared to my Taoist artifact?" "You're right, fellow Taoist." When Chu nodded and said, "The garrison order, the troop concealing flag, the troop gathering drum, and the troop withdrawal gong are the 4 ancient imperial artifacts recorded in the history books of Confucian cultivators. If I'm not mistaken, they're all in the hands of the 4 great families." 200,000 disciples of the Baiming family flew out from the garrison order and formed a team. True energy and rosy clouds surged out from the disciples and condensed into a snowy plum blossom in the air. These 200,000 disciples of the Baiming family surrounded the other side of the Fortune Gates disciples under the command of their commander. The momentum was terrifying. Xiao Hua laughed loudly. He raised a finger and pointed at the Kunlun mirror, saying, "So, the 4 big families are really planning to destroy my Fortune Gate. It looks like this war will not end until one side is dead. Good, since that's the case, this old man will not hold back today and let you see the strength of my Fortune Gate's disciples." Boom boom boom. Several light pillars rushed out from the Kunlun mirror. Roar roar roar. Another team of Fortune Gate's disciples roared and rushed out from the Shenhua continent. This team of disciples was different from the previous ones. When they rushed into the sky, they condensed into the shape of a rooster. It was the plentiful sun devil devouring immortal array. Baiming Choqing was stunned. He was not surprised that Xiao Hua could take out more disciples, but the immortal array formed by these disciples. This plentiful sun devil devouring immortal array was Yang. Lightning surged around the Fortune Gate's disciples, and the soaring aura was like the scorching sun pouncing on the Baiming family. The snowy plum blossom was already showing signs of withering. Baiming Chuiqing's shock was destined to not stop. When the 200,000 disciples lined up neatly, the murderous aura was like an unsheathed sword. He could not help but whisper, "Damn it, how many nascent soul disciples does the Fortune Gate have? Didn't they say there were 200,000? How come there are 400,000 now? Are my eyes playing tricks on me?" Shimin Jianzhong sneered. He also raised his hand and took out an ancient copper gong from somewhere. The copper gong was engraved with many armor inscriptions. These armor inscriptions glowed like silver orchids. Shimin Jianzhong didn't say anything. He flicked his middle finger and hit the gong. Bang! A soft sound was heard. The inscriptions on the gong began to move along with the sound of the gong. Rays of light gushed out from the surface of the gong and the inscriptions jumped down like fleas. When these inscriptions landed in the air, they transformed into the disciples of the Shimin family wearing silver-white armor. The Shimin family disciples roared as they landed in the air. They flew out of Dawn and Dawn Cliff and quickly formed into battle squads. In the time it took to finish half a meal, the 200,000 members of the Shimin aristocratic family had formed into an orchid-like battle team. An elegant yet formless aura filled the air once again. Furthermore, this aura combined with the aura of the other battle squads and trapped Dawn Cliff firmly. Kill. Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the provocation and mockery in the eyes of the four great families' patriarchs. He coldly shouted a single word. The word kill turned into a ball of light and flew into the Kunlun mirror. Another pillar of light appeared and the Fortune Gate's battle squads rushed out once again. Heavens! Nangong Tianji looked at the Fortune Gate's disciples flying out like carps crossing the river and couldn't help but groan. Just how many disciples does this Fortune Gate have? When I saw that the profound yellow board was filled with Fortune Gate's disciples, I was already shocked. However, when I heard that they had 200,000 disciples sweeping through the Thousand Demons' sacred grounds, I was even more shocked. They have 600,000 disciples. 600,000 nascent soul realm disciples. This Nangong Tianji didn't know how to continue. He couldn't help but look at Dongfang Qianghao. He knew that a battle squad of 600,000 nascent soul realm disciples was enough to wipe out the 100 schools of philosophers from the hidden immortal continent. Even the four great families weren't willing to provoke such a powerful opponent. Dongfang Qianghao's eyes narrowed slightly. The brilliant yang eyes hidden in his eyes couldn't help but shine like the sun. The shock in his heart wasn't any less than Nangong Tianji and the others. He had already known about Xiaohua's rise from his family's secret report. Moreover, he had also carefully read all the information about Xiaohua. Of course, he didn't know much more than Fairy Xingyu. Although the Dongfang family's ability to gather information was stronger than star-picking houses. In Dongfang Qianghao's eyes, although Xiaohua was powerful, he was the same as the Grand Mist Ancestor and the other powerful Dao sect cultivators on the hidden immortal continent. In terms of individual strength, he was close to the peak of the 9th grade. However, in terms of the strength of his sect, each and every one of them was weak. Dongfang Qianghao and the patriarchs of the four great families had the same countermeasure to deal with this kind of Dao sect cultivator. After all, the purpose of a cultivator's cultivation was to ascend. When one reached the final step of cultivation, no one would be willing to risk their lives. As long as they didn't lose face, they wouldn't kill fiercely. Although this kind of cultivator was fierce, in the end, if it wasn't for the fact that their lifespan was limited and they couldn't break through the bottleneck, they would die of old age. Otherwise, they would be killed by the four great families. After all, a person's energy was limited. It was impossible to be vigilant against tens of thousands of disciples at all times. However, when Dongfang Qianghao heard that Xiaohua had 200,000 disciples, he couldn't sit still. 200,000 nascent soul disciples. Not 2,000 but 200,000. This was something that had never happened on the hidden immortal continent. There had never been a Dao sect with 200,000 disciples on the hidden immortal continent. In particular, Dongfang Qianghao could see that the Fortune Gate had a close relationship with the Immortal Palace. Whether it was to destroy the Dao sect or to limit the Immortal Palace's strength, the four great families couldn't let the Fortune Gate continue to exist on the hidden Immortal continent. Therefore, after receiving Nangong Tianji's message, he made the decision today. However, the patriarchs of the four great families, including Dongfang Qianghao, didn't expect that the previously unknown Xiaohua had already surpassed their expectations. Although they had already mobilized 200,000 disciples from their respective sects to surround the Fortune Gate's 200,000 disciples and annihilate them, Xiaohua's Kunlun mirror gave them a resounding slap in the face. Today, not only would they not be able to defeat Xiaohua, they would most likely be defeated. Since they had already come to this point, Dongfang Qianghao couldn't retreat. He raised his hand and took out a fist-sized drum and threw it into the air. Dong. As Dongfang Qianghao spat out a stream of qi on the drum, the small drum suddenly expanded and turned into a light projection that resembled a city gate. Waves of battle cries rang out from the city gate. Groups of Dongfang family's disciples in golden armor flew out valiantly. When these disciples stood still outside the cliff, there were at least 300,000 of them. The army formed by these 300,000 disciples was similar to the three aristocratic families from before, also in the shape of a bamboo flower. Their golden brilliance was mixed with soaring battle intent as they charged toward Xiaohua's Chaomuya. However, Xiaohua, who was standing on Chaomu Cliff, didn't activate the Kunlun mirror. Instead, he frowned and whispered to Wenchu beside him. There was a trace of anxiety on Wenchu's face. Strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Dongfang Qianghao coldly snorted and ordered, Zhenzhong, Tianji, Chuiqing, prepare yourselves. Don't let the Palace of Literature's master escape. In today's battle, not only will we destroy the Fortune Gate and dispel the North Star's delusion, but we will also leave behind the 5 Qi unification art. After the three great families' patriarchs responded and Dongfang Qianghao was about to give the order, Xiaohua, who was standing on Chaomu Cliff, seemed to have noticed something different. He casually raised his hand again. Boom. The Kunlun mirror rumbled again and groups of Fortune Gate's disciples flew out again. Dongfang Qianghao was dumbfounded, Shimen Zhenzhong was dumbfounded, Nangong Tianji was dumbfounded, and Baiming Chuiqing was dumbfounded. The 4 Fortune Gate disciples' eyeballs spun rapidly as they watched the Fortune Gate disciples fly out one after another. They were still calculating how many Fortune Gate disciples would fly out, but when they saw more than a dozen Fortune Gate disciples flying out, the 4 Fortune Gate disciples completely gave up. Dongfang Qianghao's gaze swept across Shimen Zhenzhong and the other 2. His eyes were filled with shock and regret. The 300,000 Fortune Gate's disciples not only consisted of humans but also dragons. A total of 300,000 disciples formed a heart-cleansing winnowing basket formation. A huge shadow of a leopard appeared in the sky above the battlefield. Layers of air currents surged in the sky. The shadow seemed to be alive as it roared and pounced on the bamboo flowers. The 900,000 disciples from the 4 great families and Fortune Gate's disciples had already caused a change in the weather. The morning and evening lights began to sway under the rapid absorption of the righteous energy and heaven and earth origin energy. Even the 2 Chaomu cliffs that stood tall like jade pillars were swaying. Needless to say, the sea of clouds at the bottom of the abyss seemed to be stirred up by a giant hand. Strange hissing sounds could be heard as if a powerful monster was howling at the bottom of the abyss. Seeing that their advantage in numbers was gone, Dongfang Qianghao hesitated. In his life, he had never hesitated as much as he did today. Even when facing Immortal Emperor Go-Chen, he was calm. He had lost his usual decisiveness. My sons. While Dongfang Qianghao was pondering, Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the patriarchs of the 4 great clans. His eyes flashed with deep mockery. Xiaohua raised his hand again and shouted, "The Immortal Palace has been shaken by your might after you all cleared the Confucian cultivators' Xianhuang list. However, the 4 great families still have the intention to destroy my Fortune Gate. Today, you even set up a battle formation at the Chaomu Cliffs to kill my Fortune Gate. Everyone listen to my command. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. If people offend me, I will definitely retaliate. Kill. Chapter 46:16. Kill. 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 The 4 battle teams shouted the word, kill, repeatedly. Every time they shouted, the morale of the Fortune Gate disciples rose by a notch. After the 4th shout, the 900,000 Fortune Gate disciples' morale soared. The 4 battle teams charged towards the 4 families' battle teams. Dongfang Qianghao was filled with regret, but he didn't have time to say anything. He raised his hand and tapped on the drum, causing it to soar into the sky again. Dong dong dong. The sound of the drum resounded through the sky. Kill. Following Dongfang Qianghao's command, the 4 flowers moved, emitting a dazzling light as they pounced on the Fortune Gate's disciples in the form of rabbits, golden crows, leopards, and roosters. As soon as the 2 sides' disciples came into contact with each other, a thunderous boom rang out, and light and clouds splashed in all directions. Xiaohua glanced at Wenchu and said, "Fellow Immortal, earlier, the 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples swept through the 1,000 beast sacred grounds, several hundred high-grade disciples cleaned up the mysterious yellow list, and the soaring Dragon Mountain Ranges Shao country established their country were all to intimidate ordinary Confucian cultivators, so that they wouldn't dare to underestimate our Fortune Gates disciples. Today, our 900,000 Fortune Gates disciples are fighting against the 4 families. This is the time for our Fortune Gate to establish our might on the hidden immortal mainland. After this battle, our Fortune Gate will be like the scorching noon sun, shining with invincible brilliance and looking down on the 3 continents." Wenchu also felt pity at this time. Looking at the 2 sides fighting, there were already people screaming and falling into the abyss. He said, "I still underestimated the human heart and humanity. I really didn't expect that there would be such a big battle today. Maybe there will be a fierce battle at the soaring Dragon Mountain Range." "It doesn't matter." Xiaohua smiled faintly and said, "Even if there is a fierce battle, 100,000 disciples and fellow immortal Feng are enough. I don't believe that the 4 families have the strength to spare to attack the soaring Dragon Mountain Range." Wenchu nodded and said, "Their goal is the 5 Qi unification technique, so there shouldn't be any problems. Fellow immortals, it's time to come out and meet the 4 most ancient families on the hidden immortal mainland." Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed at the Kunlun mirror. The lightning Taoist and celestial being flew out of the light pillar. Xiaohua smiled and said, "I'm afraid these 2 fellow immortals won't be able to hide from the eyes and ears of the 4 families. Greetings, fellow Taoist." The Thunderbolt Reverend and the Celestial landed in midair. However, they instantly understood the current situation of the battle. The Thunderbolt Reverend and the Celestial cupped their hands and bowed. This poor Taoist truly did not expect that the 4 great clans would actually want to attack first. After Xiaohua and Wenchu returned the greeting, they smiled and said, "I'll have to trouble the 2 of you again today. Daring to have designs on my Fortune Gate, daring to disturb I's cultivation, all of them deserve to die." The celestial being spat viciously, "May I know which one friend wants me to kill? Let's go, we'll go take a look. We'll kill whoever suits our tastes." Xiaohua smiled and flew out of Chaomuya. Seeing Xiaohua and the other 3 flying out, the patriarchs of the 4 great families also flew out on clouds. However, right after the 4 of them flew out, more than 10 white-haired old men also flew out. These old men were dressed differently, following behind different patriarchs. Obviously, they belonged to different families. A 9th-grade origin energy literature saint? Xiaohua exclaimed in shock when he saw these old men. Is there really a literature saint with strength comparable to a literature star in this world? Wenchu didn't find it strange at all. He said indifferently, "The true cultivation system of us Confucian cultivators is to refine essence into qi, refine qi into spirit, refine spirit into the void, and refine the void into the heavens. The so-called scholar, master of literature, grandmaster, great-grandmaster, literature saint, and literature star are just some titles. They are different from the Tao Gates Qi refining, foundation establishment, and nascent soul realms. As time passes, it's inevitable that people will misunderstand. A literature star is actually similar to a great sage in the Thousand Demons' sacred ground. Without great fortune, one can't be called a literature star. As for fortune, the 100 schools of thought should have their own secrets, not to mention the 4 great families. Every generation's patriarch would become a literature star. But what about those literature saints who are not weaker than the patriarchs? Although they don't have any fortune, they can still cultivate. Refining the heavens and refining the void doesn't care if you have the merit of teaching them. So what if they are 9th-level literature saints? The Celestial sneered, they are just some middle-level 9th-level Confucian cultivators. When Chu glanced at him, the Celestial replied, but what if 4 or 5 middle-level 9th-level Confucian cultivators and 1 upper-level 9th-level Confucian cultivator attack you? Kill them all. The Celestial spat out 3 words. However, after a moment, he turned around and asked, fellow Taoist Xiao, can I borrow your disciple's weapon? Xiao Hua understood that the Celestial was talking about Yuan Ya's bone spear. He smiled and said, of course. Yuan Ya is also your disciple. The Celestial nodded. I know. After the Celestial finished speaking, Xiao Hua waved his hand and took out the bone spear. The Celestial took the bone spear and waved it in the air. Swoosh! A wave of demonic chi surged out from the bone spear. The roar of the bone dragon came from the depths of the demonic chi. Damn it! Dongfang Qionghao's heart tightened when he saw the Celestial take out the bone spear. He subconsciously looked at Shimin Jinzhong and the others. The 4 of them exchanged glances and shook their heads. Forget it. Dongfang Qionghao gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, today, I'm afraid that the Fortune Gate's reputation will be ruined. Our 4 great families will be humiliated. Nangong Tianji's mouth was filled with bitterness. He looked at Xiao Hua, who was flying over proudly, and remained silent for a long time. The Nangong family was about to lose more than the other 3 great families. Not necessarily. Baiming Chouqing was unwilling to give up. Our goal is not to fight. Today, we only need to capture the Literature Palace Master and it will be a complete victory. That's right. Shimin Jianzhong gritted his teeth and said, exchanging 900,000 disciples for the 5 Qis unification technique is worth it. Good. Dongfang Qionghao also made a decision in his heart. He waved his hand and said, since that's the case, we will act according to the plan. Don't let Gaochen see any flaws. Xiao Hua, Wen Chu, Lightning Taoist, and the Celestial had already met up with Dongfang Qionghao, Shimin Jianzhong, Nangong Tianji, and Baiming Chouqing. The abyss between the Dawn and Dusk Cliff was different from the 2 sides of the Dawn and Dusk Cliff. The void overlapped and compressed together like soft straw. Strands of black and white clouds with the aura of the stars and moon wandered freely in this unstable space. The wind in the sky was more biting cold than ordinary space. Wherever the wind blades landed, even the rocks would be cut open. Xiao Hua and the others' divine senses were not obstructed at this high altitude. When their divine senses swept through the space, they could even create layers of ripples. More than 20 supreme cultivators of hidden immortal continent had already spread out, standing high up in the sky. Their expressions were like water. Sounds of fighting, screams, and the sound of magical treasures and imperial tools colliding with each other faintly came from under everyone's feet. It seemed that they had already said too much. At this point, both sides no longer had any extra words to say. Xiao Hua and Dongfang Qionghao's gazes met, and sparks seemed to appear in the air. The 2 of them roared in unison and flew out. However, Dongfang Qionghao glanced at Xiao Hua coldly. His figure flashed, and in a flash, he passed by Xiao Hua and pounced on Wen Chu. In the eyes of the arrogant Dongfang Qionghao, only the master of the Wen Chu Palace was his real opponent. As for Xiao Hua, he could only leave it to Nangong Tianji. Nangong Tianji, who had been planning for a long time, could finally face Xiao Hua, who was about to trample on his sect's face. His eyes were already red. Xiao Hua sneered. Why would he care who his opponent was? Since the Nangong family had delivered themselves to his door, he was also overjoyed. Lightning flashed around Xiao Hua's body as he used the Heavenly Law's embodiment technique. His golden body, which was several thousand feet tall, was formed. He immediately clenched his right fist and smashed it towards Nangong Tianji. Nangong Tianji didn't show any signs of weakness. When he saw Xiao Hua activating his avatar, he also opened his mouth. Dozens of vast chi pillars fell from the sky and smashed onto his body. Nangong Tianji also activated his avatar and chased after Xiao Hua. The few Wen saints behind Nangong Tianji were also arrogant. They activated their avatar and surrounded Xiao Hua. Then they waved their fists and legs and pounced on Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's fist collided with Nangong Tianji's fist. A huge shockwave surged out. Xiao Hua staggered under the force of Nangong Tianji's fist. He seemed to have lost his balance. The few Wen saints who were pouncing on Xiao Hua actually swayed slightly. However, the multicolored light around them flickered. They received the impact and attacked Xiao Hua's back. Bang bang bang. Although Xiao Hua was in a sorry state, he still tried his best to raise his leg. With a flash of golden light, an illusory figure appeared like a wave and kicked the bodies of the Wen saints. When the Wen saints saw that Xiao Hua's fists and legs were not a match for Nangong Tianji, they sneered in their hearts. They waved their fists and legs toward Xiao Hua. Bang bang bang. Several gusts of wind rose again. Xiao Hua's golden body was sent flying in the air by the two Wen saints. However, the two Wen saints' avatars did not have any special changes. Following Xiao Hua's retreat, the other Wen saints had already arrived. Their fists landed on Xiao Hua's back. With a flash of golden light on Xiao Hua's back, a powerful rebounding force rushed out. The two Wen saints actually staggered. However, the radiance on Xiao Hua's back did not even dim in the slightest. Seeing that Xiao Hua's fists and legs were ordinary, but his golden body was indeed extremely powerful, Nangong Tianji sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew that he might not be able to gain the upper hand in a physical fight. Thus, he raised his hand and slapped his own head. A mottled five-colored true chi surged out. Similarly, the Wen saints did not dare to fight Xiao Hua head-on. They also raised their hands and slapped their own heads. Several streams of four-colored true chi gushed out and transformed into several large hands that fell down. Oh my! The four great families indeed live up to their reputation. Although Nangong Tianji's five-colored large hands were somewhat impure, the large hands that were formed were as hard as jade. They were even more powerful than Wen Chu's five-colored large hands. Xiao Hua could not help but praise this true chi transformation technique. I'm afraid that there are very few people in the world who can compare to it. Chapter 46:17. Several large hands fell down, tearing the void apart. The power of space firmly confined Xiao Hua within a few dozen miles. Not to mention escaping, even the wind had to stop. This spatial energy was completely controlled by the Nangong family's Wen sages and Wen Chu, who were at the 9th grade of essence energy. Good, watch this Xiao's move. Xiao Hua was not afraid at all. He roared and slapped his head. Boom boom boom. Several thunderous roars rang out, and lightning spewed out like a tidal wave. It condensed into a giant lightning hand in the air and grabbed at the five-colored giant hands. Gotcha! Swoosh! Under Xiao Hua's thunderous giant hand, the Nangong family's giant hands all stopped. The true energy and inscriptions that were previously flowing like flood dragons were now as stiff as dead snakes. No matter how hard Nangong Tianji and the others tried to activate them, they still couldn't do as they wished. A kind of deathly aura that was like autumn frost directly passed through the giant hands and spread towards everyone's bodies. Damn it! Nangong Tianji roared. He opened his mouth, and a mouthful of true chi fell into the giant hands. At the same time, several Wen saints followed suit and spat out their true chi. As their true chi fell into the giant hands expanded and clashed with Xiao Hua's lightning hand. The lightning was like a flood dragon, crazily pouncing on the giant hands, while the true chi was like a dragon, fiercely counterattacking. The battle between the Nangong families Wen Chu had already affected the surrounding several hundred li. When Xiao Hua and Nangong Tianji made their move, they had already flown up carefully, trying their best not to affect the disciples under them. However, the spatial storm still came crashing down like waves, and thousands of disciples were swept into it. Whether it was the capital Heavenly Star Formation or the Nangong family's battle formation, they were all messed up. Some disciples were even accidentally thrown into the abyss. The Fortune Gate's disciples were better off. After all, some of them had experienced the battle between humans and devils, and they often used some methods to train their disciples. These methods were all stored in the Fortune Gate's training grounds on the Shenhua continent. Of course, these training grounds were built by the Lightning Taoist himself. On the Shenhua continent, the Lightning Taoist and Jade Archive Xiaohua were close to gods. They could do a lot for the Fortune Gate's disciples, and many of them were close to the laws of heaven and earth. Therefore, the Fortune Gate's method of training disciples was far superior to the four big families. This was also the reason why the Shenhua continent was able to produce an unstoppable army. What's more, the disciples that the four great clans brought out were mostly their hidden strength. Not to mention that there weren't many soldiers in the hidden Immortal continent, there were very few large-scale battles. These disciples themselves had even less experience in battles. This battle highlighted one of the Fortune Gate's disciples' strengths, and that was their ability to survive in a battle between two extremely powerful masters. The Fortune Gate's disciples split into groups of 3 to 5, supporting each other as they tried to escape from the storm's range. Even if they couldn't escape, they remained calm, waiting for an opportunity to escape as their bodies plummeted to the ground. There were even some who were even bolder and actually used the spatial storm to attack the disciples of the four great clans. It was just this little bit of experience and training. After the spatial storm, the disciples of the four great clans had already lost quite a few. Nangong Tianji and the others naturally didn't care about the lives of the disciples within several hundred li of them. Not only did the five-colored giant hand tear the space apart, even the faintly discernible earth, fire, wind, lightning, and other auras in the sky were torn apart. It was as if the sky was collapsing, and the entire space smashed toward Xiaohua. Looking at Xiaohua's lightning giant hand, the 5 fingers were already different in color, and the entire hand was filled with lightning. Although it wasn't as condensed as Nangong Tianji's 5-colored giant hand, it was superior in terms of the purity of the lightning, and the momentum of the lightning was terrifying. Seeing the lightning hand wave, the space between Xiaohua and the hand was immediately sucked dry. Countless hurricanes and indescribable fluctuations rushed out from the torn space, violently pouncing towards Xiaohua. This storm, which could instantly kill an ordinary cultivator, fell on Xiaohua's golden body, but it only set off some ripples of golden light. Boom boom boom. The thunderous hand clashed with several 5-colored hands, and a destructive aura that was even more powerful than the collapse of the heavens and the earth rose from the sky. The thunderous hand was shattered, and countless thunderbolts flew in all directions, smashing into the void and shattering it. The 5-colored hands were also torn apart, and the translucent jade-like hands turned into countless fragments. Countless fragments also turned into fragmented aura and disappeared into the void. Violent gales rose, and the storm rolled. Within 1,000 li, the wind and clouds surged. Even someone as strong as Nangong Tianji staggered, and the protective light around his body was also blown away like a candle in the wind. With Nangong Tianji in such a state, those 9th-grade essence energy literary saints were even more embarrassed. Their bodies lost their balance, and they quickly rushed out of the storm. These literary saints were also shocked. Just a casual clash of divine abilities could cause such a huge commotion, and Xiaohua actually didn't fall into a disadvantageous position even when fighting against so many of them. This was something they really didn't expect. However, in this world there were only more surprises, but no more surprises. Just as they were about to get out of the range of the storm, suddenly a light figure rushed out from the lightning fragments. Xiaohua's tall and thin figure actually went against the wind, and with the help of the wind, he instantly appeared in front of them. What is this guy doing? The cultivation method of the literary saints of Confucianism was different from that of the Taoism cultivators. They had always emphasized practicing. Moreover, the true 5 Qis unification technique was to refine the 5 viscera and 6 bowels. The cultivation methods of the four major families were incomplete, but there were more or less traces of the true cultivation methods. Therefore, most of the disciples of the four major families would refine their bodies while refining their qi. When these literary saints saw Xiao Hua suddenly appear, they were surprised, but they weren't particularly afraid. In fact, they were even a little confused. After all, they believed that the cultivation of their physical bodies was definitely stronger than that of the Taoism cultivators of the same level. Moreover, Xiao Hua didn't gain any advantage when he was surrounded by so many people. Instead, he seemed to be losing. Seeing Xiao Hua's figure appear, he waved his fist, and like several phantoms, he landed on several literary saints. These literary saints' hearts were filled with disdain, and the same thought emerged from the bottom of their hearts: damn it. My divine abilities may not be as powerful as a human Mahayana stage cultivator, but didn't we already see the power of my fists and feet? It's just that I'm a little stronger and my skin is thicker. Therefore, while these literary saints were on guard against Xiao Hua's backup plan, they also slacked off and swung their fists and legs to meet the enemy. There was even a literary saint who actually used the eye-clearing technique to test the strength of this punch. In the distance, Nangong Tianji also ignored Xiao Hua's sudden intrusion, and a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Amidst the fierce wind, his figure strangely flashed with multicolored light, turning into a distorted light shadow, and rushed behind Xiao Hua like lightning, preparing to gang up on Xiao Hua with the other literary saints. As expected, Xiao Hua's fist collided with the fist of one of the literary saints. A sound that wasn't very loud rang out. When Sheng, who had a smile on his face, suddenly had a change in expression the instant his fist came into contact with Xiao Hua's fist. This was because he saw that Xiao Hua's fist had suddenly shrunk, and a black halo of light had unexpectedly appeared in the air. Not good. When Sheng, who was proficient in body cultivation, immediately sensed that something was wrong from the force of the fist coming into contact with Xiao Hua's fist, and an unavoidable feeling arose spontaneously. However, before he could open his mouth to warn the others, Xiao Hua's fist had already landed. The sound of the explosion wasn't loud, but the power was extremely great. Nangong Tianji and the others could see that the literary saint's subbody, starting from the fist, followed by his arm, all the way until half of his subbody collapsed with a loud bang, and countless inscriptions were annihilated in the collapse. In this collapse, the noble qi turned into a vortex, and pieces of flesh and blood burst out at the same time. On the side of the collapsed subbody and physical body of the literary saint, more than 10 layers of space appeared, and the flesh and blood of the literary saint were swallowed by the void, and could no longer be recovered. Damn it! Seeing the power of Xiao Hua's fist, Nangong Tianji cursed inwardly. He realized that Xiao Hua's previous move was just a tactic to lure the enemy. He hurriedly sped up and sent out a palm strike, wanting to attract Xiao Hua's attention. Unfortunately, just as Nangong Tianji came to his senses, Xiao Hua's fist wind pounced towards the other literary saint. That literary saint had long been scared witless after seeing the power of Xiao Hua's fist. He didn't dare to take Xiao Hua's fist head-on, and tried to move his body to dodge. It was also at this moment, woo! The sound of the wind rose again, and under the body of the literary saint, Xiao Hua's legs stretched out from the void, and kicked the waist of the literary saint. The strength of a leg has always surpassed the wind of a fist. When Xiao Hua's leg landed, the subbody of the literary saint collapsed bit by bit, and an oval-shaped black hole fell into the body of the literary saint. The literary saint screamed miserably, and a bloody light appeared at the collapsed area again. His subbody rapidly shrank, and his physical body was almost cut in half. At the same time that Xiao Hua succeeded in killing the second literary saint, Nangong Tianji's palm also arrived. Contrary to Nangong Tianji's expectations, Xiao Hua didn't dodge at all. Seeing Xiao Hua so confident, Nangong Tianji suddenly thought of the situation when Xiao Hua was hit by the two literary saints, and he couldn't help but feel that things were not good. Another loud sound rang out. Nangong Tianji's palm was indeed accumulating strength. If a mountain was here, it would probably be pushed down by his palm. Xiao Hua wasn't a mountain, and naturally, he couldn't block Nangong Tianji's palm. However, Xiaohua's golden body was sent flying by Nangong Tianji's palm. Xiaohua's golden body instantly collapsed, and the golden light was quickly extinguished. Xiaohua's figure actually pounced on the third literary saint. How could Nangong Tianji not know Xiaohua's plan? The tricks that ordinary martial artists often used in the competition were actually used by the Taoist sect's Grand Ascension Stage cultivators in this supreme battle. This was not only beyond Nangong Tianji's expectations, but it was also out of Nangong Tianji's expectations. Nangong Tianji couldn't help but gnash his teeth and say, "Damn it! Borrowing strength to fight strength." Chapter 46:18. Of course, Nangong Tianji's curiosity was piqued. After all, he knew the strength of his palm. Even if Immortal Emperor Gochen was here, he wouldn't dare to let his palm land on his body. Unless it was the 7 great sages from the Great Sage Hall. At the thought of this, Nangong Tianji suddenly realized something and shouted, "Pingu, retreat! This bastard's body is extremely strong, don't." Nangong Tianji originally wanted to say, "Don't let him get close," but he was only halfway through when Xiaohua had already forced himself to the side of the literature sage named Nangong Pingu. This literature sage, who had just used the clear eyes technique to probe the strength of Xiaohua's fist, had only blocked Xiaohua's left fist, and was immediately hit in the shoulder by Xiaohua's right fist. Boom! Another muffled sound rang out. Nangong Pingu's subbody began to collapse from the shoulder. In an instant, the subbody was shattered, and even the body below the subbody was affected. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. However, Nangong Pingu, who was about to faint from the pain, stared at Xiaohua, who was soaring into the sky. His eyes were filled with confusion. This was because he could clearly see that the fist that was about to strike his heart had swerved slightly and was now aiming for his shoulder. The fact that he hadn't been killed on the spot wasn't because he was lucky, nor was it because he had managed to evade in time. Instead, it was because this Grand Ascension Stage Taoist was holding back. Seeing the 3 9th grade sage of origin energy being killed or injured by Xiaohua in just a few rounds, Nangong Tianji's heart ached as if it was being stabbed by a knife. He knew very well in his heart which of those Confucian cultivators who were able to cultivate to the 9th grade of origin energy did not possess supreme skills. Although these Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall were not Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall. Even if they were facing Immortal Emperor Gochen, they wouldn't be injured in just a few rounds. This was also the reason why he, as the patriarch of the 4 great clans, was not worried about letting these 9th grade Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall fight. However, Nangong Tianji didn't expect Xiaohua's Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall to be able to flatten a mountain with a single punch. As a result, these 3 9th grade literary saints were killed and injured by Xiaohua before they could even use the true divine arts of the Confucian cultivators. This purely physical injury was even more severe than Taoist magic power. Even though Xiaohua didn't take Nangong Pingu's life today, it would be difficult for this 9th grade essence force literary sage to advance his cultivation in the future. Even one's lifespan would be affected. Xiaohua, this old man will not rest until you die. Nangong Tianji's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He roared as he raised his hand and slapped the top of his head again. Rumbling sounds could be heard from Nangong Tianji's body. Ripples of space surged out from his body. Sharp, bird-like whistling sounds could be heard from the top of his head. Xiaohua originally wanted to continue chasing after the 2 remaining saints of literature, but when he saw the white hair of the 2 saints of literature running away and Nangong Tianji challenging them, he stopped in the air and turned around coldly. He looked at the rapidly swaying earth, fire, wind, and thunder in the sky and laughed. "Won't stop until one of us dies? What a joke! Nangong Tianji, you're thinking too much. You don't have the qualifications to fight with me until one of us dies." When Nangong Tianji heard Xiaohua's words, even though he knew that Xiaohua was trying to provoke him, he was still so angry that his lungs were about to explode. "Pooh!" Nangong Tianji roared angrily. He opened his mouth again, and a 5-colored pillar of air shot out from his mouth. It shot straight up into the sky and pierced into the earth, fire, wind, and thunder. The earth, fire, wind, and thunder let out a loud explosion. Countless wind and thunder fell into the five-colored pillar of light like a heavenly river bursting through a dam. At this moment, above Nangong Tiansun's head, a similar pillar of energy shot out. This pillar of energy wasn't five-colored, but golden. Hundreds of millions of inscriptions surged out like golden chrysanthemums, enveloping the surrounding several hundred miles. The golden chrysanthemums were like a vast river. Wherever the earth, fire, wind, and lightning fell, all of the golden chrysanthemums transformed. Under the cover of the river, the space was completely locked down. All of the noble energy and the world's origin energy melted away. Even within Xiaohua's divine sense, the five elements of heaven and earth began to change. Faint rays of light began to shoot out in all directions, swaying in all directions within the space. Nangong Tianji laughed sinisterly. He watched as Xiaohua's golden body was covered by countless tiny rays of light. It was as if he had fallen into a net. He shouted proudly, "Xiaohua, today this old man will let you see what the true noble Qi River is." As Nangong Tianji's voice fell, the earth, fire, wind, and thunder in the sky turned into aurora magnetism through the golden chrysanthemum. Under the aurora magnetism, the space within 1,000 miles was filled with dazzling sparks. The entire space was filled with strange laws. Under this strange light, Xiaohua's face also revealed a strange smile. The righteous spirit river of Confucian cultivators had always been a divine ability that Xiaohua highly praised. Under the righteous spirit river, the righteous spirit would envelop the space, and any evil force would be destroyed by this righteous spirit. However, although Nangong Tianji's noble Qi River was several times stronger than an ordinary noble Qi River, even someone as strong as Xiaohua could feel the sharpness of the aurora magnetism. Xiaohua didn't doubt that if this river-like aurora magnetism fell, his golden body would definitely be riddled with holes. Even his nascent soul might not be able to escape the fate of being killed. It could be said that the noble Qi River was the true nemesis of Taoism cultivators. Unfortunately, Nangong Tianji met Xiaohua. Seeing the smile on Xiaohua's face, which contained a thick sense of ridicule, Nangong Tianji's heart thumped. He couldn't help but look into the distance. Just as Nangong Tianji felt that something was wrong, Xiaohua opened his mouth. Pooh! With a sound, the spirit-slaying sword gourd spat out from his mouth. Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed, and a thick crystal light fell into the sword gourd. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sword gourd vibrated, and the spirit-slaying sword gourd soared into the sky. When the river-like aurora magnetism came into contact with the spirit-slaying sword gourd, it immediately seemed as if it had seen a long-lost relative. It rushed in without a care for its own safety, and had long forgotten Nangong Tianji's hospitality. This is... Nangong Tianji didn't expect that Xiaohua would be able to destroy the noble spirit river that he was so proud of with just a single magical treasure. Furthermore, the vast and mighty aurora magnetism didn't listen to his command at all. It gathered into two thick beams of light and went against the current, pouncing towards him like a huge dragon. Damn it! Nangong Tianji was shocked. The chrysanthemum and snowflakes above his head immediately retracted, and turned into a golden chrysanthemum cloud to protect him. Roar! At this moment, Dongfang Qionghao's roar sounded in the distant sky. Nangong Tianji was overjoyed. His figure flashed, and he teleported towards that direction. Want to leave? Xiaohua sneered. He waved his right hand again, and a ray of golden light flashed in the sky like a pair of scissors. It immediately slashed across Dongfang Qionghao's illusory figure. Swoosh! The illusory figure that had already turned into a distorted light was actually cut off by the soaring dragon scissors. The right leg of the illusory figure was cut off. The moment the right leg left the illusory figure, it immediately collapsed, and it turned into noble qi and runes that scattered in the sky. Nangong Tianji howled in grief, but he didn't stop. He continued to rush into the distance as if he had planned this beforehand. Xiaohua snorted coldly. He raised his head and looked at the spirit-slaying sword gourd circling above his head. He then lowered his head and sneered, "Since you want to destroy my fortune gate, Then, don't blame me for being merciless. Go. As Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed, two thick rays of spirit-slaying sword gourd turned into hundreds of thousands of light threads and crazily rained down. Countless miserable screams rang out from the sea of clouds. Each ray of light penetrated the body of an aristocratic family's disciple and directly pierced their dantian. Xiaohua wouldn't take their lives, but whether they could stay alive or not, that would depend on their own fortune. Just as Xiaohua was about to withdraw the spirit-slaying sword gourd, he heard a clear light in the distance, and another strange phenomenon appeared back to Xiaohua's battle against the Nangong family. The heaven expert flew out with his bone spear, but he was also blocked by Shimin Jianzhong and several 9th-grade Essence Force saints. The heaven expert swung his bone spear and raised his head to look into the distance. He roared, "Shimin Jianzhong, you are not my opponent. Hurry up and get out of my way. I want to meet Dongfang Qianghao." Shimin Jianzhong sneered, and a cold light appeared around him. He said, "Your opponent is this old man. Wen Chu is Dongfang Qianghao's opponent. Of course, if you can defeat this old man, then you can go find Dongfang Qianghao. However, this old man wants to see the origin of a Taoist cultivator who can fight evenly with the master of the Jade Pure Palace." After saying that, Shimin Jianzhong didn't hesitate. Inscriptions flickered all over his body, and clouds surged out. Thick awe-inspiring qi penetrated through the fragile void and fell on his body. Boom boom boom. Shimin Jianzhong's body trembled, and layers of sword light bloomed like flowers. Every layer of sword light was accompanied by a sword intent. It was either life and death, or austere, or bloody. This sword intent enveloped an area of several hundred li in just a moment. As this sword intent surged out, the bodies of the several saints of literature also glowed with sword light. Not to mention that their limbs were as sharp as flying swords. Even the gaze in their eyes was like a sword. So it's a sword cultivator. The heaven expert laughed and shouted, "It's not like this old man hasn't fought with sword cultivators before. Come, fight with this old man for 300 rounds. As he spoke, the heaven expert's body swayed, and the blood light on the bone spear surged. A pitch-black demonic dragon emerged from the bone spear, roaring and pouncing toward Shimin Jianzhong. The awe-inspiring qi of the Confucian cultivators had always been the natural nemesis of the devil clan, but correspondingly, the devil qi and the awe-inspiring qi had been rivals since ancient times. Although Shimin Jianzhong activated his sword intent, the demonic dragon's bloody, murderous, and violent intent rushed into Shimin Jianzhong's defense and went straight into his heart. Give it a reward, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46:19. Seeing that the celestial was so powerful, Shimin Jianzhong was also shocked. He thought to himself, "Damn it, how can this Taoist body cultivator have a demonic weapon?" When he fought with the master of the Jade Pure Palace that day, he didn't use a weapon. Moreover, this demonic weapon is different from ordinary demonic weapons. The bone dragon that was refined into a demonic spear is not an ordinary dragon. The aura of this demonic weapon seems to be innately restraining the righteous aura of my Confucian cultivator. Today's battle seems to be too dangerous, far from what I expected. However, since he was already here, how could Shimin Jianzhong hesitate? He slowly raised his right hand, and a sword light appeared in his right palm like starlight. Then, countless sword cries came from the sword light, and a sword that was overflowing with brilliance began to expand rapidly. This old man will show you what the sword essence of heaven and earth is. Shimin Jianzhong roared proudly, and the huge sword that was 1,000 feet long fell like a falling mountain. The sword hair of the huge sword was like a flood dragon, and the sword essence was like a rainbow. Wherever it passed, the space was split open, the wind was split open, and even the eyes of the celestial were about to be split open. Near Shimin Jianzhong, the literary saints didn't dare to be careless. They opened their mouths at the same time, and a flying sword that looked like a hook rushed out and landed on the arm of the celestial. Wherever the sword light passed, the entire arm turned into a hook. Several people cooperated with Shimin Jianzhong, and as their bodies swayed, the hooks were like snow, attacking different parts of the celestial. Boom. In the roar, the bone spear pierced the sword light, and the sword light also split the demonic aura of the bone spear. Shimin Jianzhong was indeed the master of the Shimin family. Wherever the sword essence of heaven and earth fell, the demonic aura was split open, and the demons hidden in the demonic aura were all split in half. In the bloody light, the body of the bone spear was revealed, and a shallow notch appeared on the scales of the bone dragon's back. The gigantic sword formed by Shimin Jianzhong's sword beam was also swallowed by the bone dragon after it slashed down. Kakaka. With a crisp sound, the entire gigantic sword was shattered into pieces by the demonic light. Although each fragment struggled to transform into tens of thousands of small flying swords, before the flying swords could take form, they were shaken into inscriptions by the bone spear and scattered into the void. Kakaka. At the same time, several sounds of metal and stone rang out. Several sword shadows flashed past the celestial's back, waist, and ribs, and a series of golden lights splashed out. Awa. The celestial seemed to be in pain and roared in the air. That's all there is to it. Shimin Jianzhong looked up to the sky and laughed, saying, "This old man thought you were very powerful, but it seems that you are just a guy who is strong in appearance but weak in reality. Maybe you have succeeded in refining your body, but in this old man's eyes, your body cultivation is just like grass." As he spoke, Shimin Jianzhong raised his hand and waved it from his waist. A thin blue light flashed, and a slender sword like an orchid appeared. Although the sword light was thin, it was very tough. When it landed in the void, it pierced through the void. What was special was that the sword was very soft, and it was like duckweed in the wind. It danced with the wind, and a sense of elegance and nobility spontaneously appeared. Shimin Jianzhong stared at the sword, and his eyes revealed eagerness, as if he had seen his long-lost lover. For a moment, Shimin Jianzhong raised his head and looked at the celestial who was also vigilant in his eyes. He said proudly, "The Confucian scholars of the hidden immortal continent have long admired the gentle sword, but no one has ever heard of the feather orchid immortal sword of my Shimin family. Before the feather orchid immortal sword, the so-called #1 imperial weapon is nothing but nothingness. All the families in the world know about the Son of Heaven's sword, and with the Son of Heaven's sword, you can stabilize the world. But who knows? If you control the feather orchid sword, you can become an immortal? You are very lucky to be able to see the true appearance of the feather orchid immortal sword before you die." After speaking, Shimin Jianzhong raised his hand and waved. That sword, which was originally as soft as gossamer, suddenly gave birth to a resplendent sword light. Moreover, that sword directly soared into the sky, and an extraordinary sword intent rushed out from the sword. Wherever the sword intent passed, the broken void transformed into many orchids. Each orchid was born from the sword's splendor, and each orchid revealed a hazy world. Each orchid contained a heaven-destroying and earth-exterminating killing intent. Damn it! When the celestial saw it, he couldn't help but turn pale with fright. The celestial was formed by Xiao Hua's bone tempering. When it comes to the corporeal body, it is naturally tough and tenacious. It is very difficult for ordinary magic tools to injure him. Normally, the celestial should be the most powerful one among Xiao Hua's clones, but in fact, the celestial was the most awkward one. Previously, other than cultivating Xiao Hua's Big Dipper Fist and several bone-tempering cultivation techniques, he didn't have any other cultivation techniques. Then, in Star Moon Palace, Xiao Hua found a cultivation technique for the celestial and also found a secret technique to repair the 10,000 extinguishing heavenly dipper. However, the time was short and the celestial didn't complete it. Therefore, when facing ordinary cultivators of the lower 9th grade, the celestial had an absolute advantage. He could even deal with them more efficiently than Xiao Hua. However, when facing Shimin Jianzhong, who was also at the upper 9th grade, he was powerless. Seeing Shimin Jianzhong take out the feather orchid immortal sword, that bone-chilling sword light made his heart palpitate. Without hesitation, he waved his hand and summoned the celestial's white bone. When the celestial's white bone appeared, the space immediately began to flash with a pitch-black halo. A kind of rich, desolate aura rushed out from the white bone. When the celestial merged with the white bone, with a loud bang, the space within 100 miles began to tremble. Waves of energy wantonly swept out and merged with the desolate aura. Ayo! The Celestial looked up to the sky and roared. A fierce aura emerged from his 3 heads. Waves of sound surged toward Shimin Zhenzhong and the others. Ah? This is the ancient demon clan? Seeing that the Celestial had 3 heads and 6 arms and emitted a ferocious aura that could suppress the world, Shimin Zhenzhong was astonished. He finally understood why the Celestial could fight evenly with the Jade Pure Palace Master. However, in the blink of an eye, Shimin Zhenzhong sneered. Suddenly, tens of thousands of sword hairs appeared around his body. These sword hairs all rushed into the treasured sword in his hand. The slender treasured sword overflowed with brilliance like the rising sun. As Shimin Zhenzhong waved his hands, the seemingly slender treasured sword fell down like a meteor. Amidst the huge rumbling sound, the space habitually shattered and collapsed. The orchid sword hairs from before floated down and pounced on the Celestial. The treasured sword was still far from the Celestial. In the sky above the Celestial's head, pa pa pa, sounds of explosions suddenly sounded. Countless mighty pillars of chi were extinguished, and thumb-sized protrusions appeared around the Celestial. Looking at the other 4 sides of the sword light, the figures of the several saints of literature had already turned into swords and flew up like orchids. The sword intent that was several times stronger than before also pierced through the void and fell toward the back of the Celestial being. The demon-devouring spear is invincible. Kill Buddha if it meets Buddha, slay immortals if it meets immortals. The Celestial laughed boldly. You are just immortal ascension swords. How can you be a match for me? Roar. The Celestial opened his mouth and 3 pillars of light rushed out, passing through the sword chi and landing on Shimin Zhenzhong's head. The bone spear in his hand, under the stimulation of the desolate chi, turned into a demon dragon that was thousands of feet long and crazily expanded to meet the treasured swords. Seeing the 3 pillars of light fall, Shimin Zhenzhong did not care because the true chi around his body had already turned into sword hair and merged with the treasured swords. The Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension Sword would naturally block the light pillars. However, contrary to Shimin Zhenzhong's expectations, the Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension Sword did not block the light pillars when they passed through the sword light. And in the light pillars, Shimin Zhenzhong felt that his essence, chi, and spirit were about to leave his body. Not good. Shimin Zhenzhong knew that things were not good and hurriedly urged his true chi to block the attacks of the 3 pillars of light. Shimin Zhenzhong was distracted and the bone spear collided with the treasured swords again. The treasured swords shone brightly and the sword's momentum was like a wave. The bone spear's demonic chi soared into the sky and the spear's intent was like 1,000 caddies. The space within hundreds of miles shook at this moment. The worlds created by the sword hair were destroyed by the demonic chi, and the blood waves created by the demonic chi were also wiped out by the sword hair. This huge collision produced a vast impact. Not only did it blow away the flying swords that Shimin Zhenzhong had transformed into, it also caused the corporeal body of the celestial being with 3 heads and 6 arms to tumble. Clang, clang, clang. As he tumbled, the sounds of swords humming could be heard. The flying swords that were formed by the sage of literature had slashed through the void and slashed at the celestial being's back. Out of the celestial being's expectations, several deep sword marks appeared on his back, and the eerie white bones were revealed in the sword marks. Roar! The celestial being roared. Other than the 2 hands that were holding the spear, the other 4 arms suddenly reached into the void. At the same time, the 3 heads opened their mouths and shot 3 pillars of light at the sage of literature who was closest to them. Dodge! Shimin Zhenzhong's flying sword was raised, and his figure was naturally blocked. He saw the celestial being's arms falling into the void and immediately felt that something was wrong, so he hurriedly shouted. Moreover, he bent his body and forcefully channeled his sword. The sword turned into a ray of light and also disappeared into the void. The sage of literature who received the warning were alarmed and quickly dodged. Crack, crack, crack. Just as they were about to dodge, the celestial being's 4 arms reached out from the void and hit their shadows. With a crisp sound, several sword rays were shot down, and the Sage of Literature's secondary bodies were also slightly shattered. However, the Sage of Literature who was closest to the Celestial was not so lucky. The three pillars of light worked together and struck the Sage of Literature's sword rays with lightning speed. The Sage of Literature didn't even have time to scream before the brilliance of his secondary body was instantly extinguished, and he fell from the sky. Poof! The celestial being succeeded, but Shimin Jianzhong's Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension Sword also arrived at the same time. This sword that was even thinner than a thin thread easily pierced the celestial's heart and almost came out of his body. The Sage of Literature couldn't help but cheer when he saw the celestial being stabbed. At this time, boom! Behind the Sage of Literature, a violent wind suddenly rose. The celestial's hands that were holding the spear had unknowingly abandoned it and were now reaching out from the void and grabbing the backs of two Sage of Literatures. The two bloody hands even came out from the chests of two Sage of Literatures. Give it a tip, and thank you for all forms of support. Chapter 46:20. The celestial's other two legs didn't stay idle either. Like Xiaohua, he kicked the other two literary saints in the back. After the two literary saints' backs caved in, they fell from the sky. Damn it! Shimin Jianzhong couldn't help but gnash his teeth when he saw the celestial kill 5 literary saints right in front of him. However, what surprised him even more was that there was no blood flowing out from where the Feather Orchid Immortal sword pierced. The celestial only gritted his teeth in pain but didn't seem to be killed at all. He growled. The celestial sneered and grabbed the sword in his chest. Can't you see that I have 3 heads and 6 arms? I have 3 hearts. The celestial grabbed the sword and thunder rumbled. The entire Feather Orchid Immortal sword was controlled by lightning. Shimin Jianzhong was shocked. He hurriedly waved his right hand and the flexible sword in the lightning turned into nothingness. Roar! At the same time, Dongfang Qionghao's roar came from the distant sky. Shimin Jianzhong was startled. He looked at the remaining literary saint and teleported toward him. Ha! Seeing Shimin Jianzhong escape, the celestial didn't chase after him. Instead, he looked at that panic-stricken literary sage and strode towards him. Don't come here. That literary sage was extremely scared and actually screamed like a weak girl. The Thunderbolt Immortal saw that Xiaohua and the celestial both had opponents. He smiled at Dongfang Qianghao and said, "Old Dongfang, are you going to pick I as your opponent?" Ha! Dongfang Qianghao looked up to the sky and laughed. The Thunder Immortal is very famous. He killed many of our Confucian cultivators in the soaring Dragon Mountain range. This old man shrank back when I saw the lightning. I didn't dare to fight the immortal. Your opponent is Baiming Chouqing. Dongfang Qionghao's eyes flashed with golden light. He looked at Wen Chu and said, "Literary Star Palace Master, can you fight with me?" Fight. Wen Chu's expression did not change, but a complicated emotion flashed in his eyes as he replied. Watching Wen Chu, Dongfang Qianghao, and the others fly away, Thunderbolt Immortal looked at Baiming Chouqing and the other literary sages in the distance. He crooked his neck and laughed. Baiming Chouqing? Such a name seems to be very cultured, but looking at your excellency's appearance, it really has nothing to do with that. A tasteless Confucian cultivator like you. How could you possibly be a match for me? The Baiming family used plum blossoms as their symbol, so they naturally emphasized elegance and taste. However, Baiming Chouqing and even Baiming Jiqing had put on weight, especially Baiming Chouqing. Although her face was delicate and pretty, if she were to put on an official's attire, she would look more like an ordinary village official. How could she have the demeanor of the patriarch of the 4 great families whose name shook the world? Previously, Baiming Chouqing had also used a cultivation method to temper her corporeal body, but she originally had this kind of physique. Admittedly, the cultivation method had a certain effect, but how could it be more convenient than transfiguration? However, if she transfigured her body, Baiming Chouqing would be somewhat disdainful. Therefore, Baiming Chouqing had always considered herself a beauty. Of course, no one in the world dared to expose Baiming Chouqing's freckles. Today, Thunderbolt Immortal exposed her. How could Baiming Chouqing not be angry? Baiming Chouqing roared, "Old Thunderbolt Immortal! Don't think that you're invincible just because you killed a few literary sages of the mysterious Yellow Order. Today, I swear I'll kill you on the spot. You see, I just said you have no taste, and now you're throwing away the hypocrisy of a Confucian cultivator. The mischievous Thunderbolt Immortal was not anxious at all. He was all smiles as he said, "We've only just talked about superficial appearances, we haven't touched on the heart yet. Do you want me to boil some chicken soup for you to try, to make up for what you lack?" Without waiting for Thunderbolt Immortal to finish speaking, Bai Ming Chui Qing raised her hand and patted the top of her head. The five-colored true qi gushed out, running straight through heaven and earth. The five-colored true qi of the four great clans was naturally modeled, and so was Bai Ming Chui Qing's. However, within this soaring true qi pillar, the modeled true qi was azure, like plum blossoms. Once the five-colored true qi pillar appeared, the space within several hundred li shook. Countless true qi pillars fell from the sky, and when the five-colored true qi pillar enveloped the space within several hundred li like a fountain, those plum blossoms flickered with blue color and drifted down in the air. It was truly dazzling, truly beautiful. Looking at those literary sages of the 9th grade elemental energy, they also each stood in a corner, releasing their heterogeneous five-colored true qi, trapping the Thunderbolt Immortal from the bottom. Moreover, when the five-colored true qi gushed out, the figures of those literary sages also disappeared. Good, it's really not bad. The Thunderbolt Immortal was not anxious. He pinched his chin with his hand, with a rather elegant demeanor, and said with a smile, "It looks too beautiful to be absorbed all at once. However, when displayed by a person as fat as a pig like you, no matter how you look at it, there are some flaws. Sigh, what can I do, what can I do?" After saying that, the Thunderbolt Immortal rubbed his hands slightly, blinked his eyes, and said, "Such a beautiful painting, let this old man add the finishing touch." When Bai Ming Chui Qing heard that, she was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She stood in the air and said coldly, "Since that's the case, then please raise your brush and correct it. I hope you don't talk too big, or your teeth will fall out." In the Thunderbolt Immortal's hand, clusters of lightning slowly emerged. He still had a smile on his face as he replied, "Although this old man doesn't have Taoist sorcerer's brush and can't use the wondrous blossom brush, it's more than enough to correct your vulgarity. As for my teeth, please don't worry. This old man's age hasn't reached the point where my teeth will fall out, so we can't be mentioned in the same breath." After saying that, the Thunderbolt Immortal waved his hands, and tens of thousands of thunderbolts appeared out of thin air, transforming into the shapes of brushes, and pointed towards the plum blossoms in the air at the same time. This thunderbolt was like a huge wave overturning the sky, overturning the entire space, and its momentum was incomparably vast. However, all the thunderbolts had only rushed out 100 feet when the countless plum blossoms in the air suddenly produced indescribable fluctuations. These fluctuations were like a net, intertwining and falling. Wherever the fluctuations passed, all the thunderbolts immediately ceased to exist, turning into nothingness. So much so that when the fluctuations landed on the Thunderbolt Immortal's body, even the lightning flashing around the Thunderbolt Immortal's body was also smoothed out. The Thunderbolt Immortal was dumbstruck. Looking at those plum blossoms, they were like Bai Ming Chui Qing's small eyes that were mocking him. Bai Ming Chui Qing laughed wildly. "It's just the Dao Sect's Thunderbolt technique, what's there to be arrogant about? Didn't you want to correct this old man's winter plum forbidden lightning diagram? Why don't you pick up your lightning brush? Without it, I'm afraid your teeth will fall out." Damn it. The Thunderbolt Immortal was ashamed and angry. He raised his hand and slapped the top of his head. Rumble. A cluster of lightning spurted out, transforming into a thunderbolt technique that grabbed towards Bai Ming Chui Qing. Unfortunately, as soon as the lightning appeared, the fluctuations rose again. That thunderbolt technique whimpered as it shrank and disappeared, not causing any waves at all. "Since you don't have the strength to lift the brush then, let this old man do it." Bai Ming Chui Qing was in high spirits. She opened her mouth and a mouthful of life's true energy gushed out, transforming into countless fine threads that were similar to inscription chains. At the same time, they entered the void and connected all the plum blossoms together. Fall! When Bai Ming Chui Qing shouted, a huge azure inscription was spurted out from her mouth, falling in midair and exploding with a loud bang. Tens of thousands of plum blossoms spiraled and flashed, gushing over from all directions. That indescribable fluctuation transformed into an invisible lotus shape, trapping the Thunderbolt Immortal. As soon as the lotus shape was formed, the Thunderbolt Immortal could not perceive the situation outside the space. He only felt a cluster of misty green halos covering the area around him. He could not use his divine thoughts. The chi of heaven and earth was isolated, and even the void was imprisoned. Not good. The Thunderbolt Immortal was shocked and hurriedly wanted to urge the sound of thunder. However, just as he was about to urge his magic power, he suddenly frowned again. That's not right. The Thunderbolt Immortal narrowed his eyes and looked at the illusory green light around him. He thought to himself, the Bai Ming family is one of the 4 great families of Confucian cultivators. How can there be the aura of Taoist magic in his green light? Although this aura is very subtle, I was born to report Taoism. How can I not detect it? It's really weird. Just as the Thunderbolt Immortal was puzzled, the fluctuating aura became more and more intense, and a destructive momentum surged in the entire space. Ha! After being surprised, the Thunderbolt Immortal laughed out loud. He raised his hand and made a rare hand seal. He said, although this old man is called the Thunderbolt Immortal and the Thunderbolt technique is naturally this old man's strongest technique, don't you think you're being too delusional if you want to imprison this old man with merely the Winter Plum Forbidden Lightning diagram? Immediately, the Thunderbolt Immortal made a gesture and a bean-sized lamp appeared in midair. This lamp was divided into 6 colors, which was exactly the same as Xiao Hua's 6-colored spiritual fire. Old man Bai Ming, you fat toad at the bottom of a well. Today, I'll let you see the power of my Taoist magic. The Thunderbolt Immortal shouted. Following the Thunderbolt Immortal's finger, a thick crystal light fell into the lamp. The 6-colored spiritual fire instantly turned into a several zhang large fire pillar and directly penetrated the Thunderbolt Immortal's feet. The spiritual fire was the absolute weapon that Xiao Hua used before he reached the nascent soul stage. Once the spiritual fire was used, it was invincible. However, because the spiritual fire consumed too much magic power, Xiao Hua would never use it unless he had no other choice. When Xiao Hua reached the 9th grade of origin energy, there were too many methods that he could use. Therefore, although the spiritual fire had already become 6-colored, Xiao Hua basically didn't use it anymore. The Thunderbolt Immortal naturally knew the power of the 6-colored spiritual fire. While he was cultivating the Thunderbolt technique, he was also pondering how to refine the 6-colored spiritual fire. The incantation that he was using now was a spell that used the 6-colored spiritual fire as the seed and his own magic power as the supplement. This spell was purely of the fire attribute and didn't consume much magic power. Normally, the Thunderbolt Immortal didn't have the opportunity to use this spell. Since he was forced to this place by Bai Ming Qing, he just happened to witness the power of this fire attribute spell. Chapter 46:21. A muffled sound that wasn't particularly loud rang out. The place where the fire pillar landed, the misty blue illusion was pierced through. Under the fire pillar, the hundreds of plum blossom clouds vanished. The forbidden thunder diagram of the winter plum blossom had been easily destroyed by the Thunder Immortal. What kind of fire is this? Bai Ming Qing looked at the fire pillar in a daze and cried out, how can an ordinary fire break my green lotus? At this point, Bai Ming Qing's expression changed greatly. He hurriedly raised his hand and grabbed. A huge hand of several miles in size fell from the sky. He shouted angrily, damn it! How can you bully the weak like this? Seeing that the fire pillar had broken through the imprisonment, the Thunderbolt Immortal's figure swayed and immediately landed at the flaw. He reached his hand into the fire pillar. Then, without hesitation, the Thunderbolt Immortal flipped his hands and several fire spears separated from the fire pillar. The Thunderbolt Immortal raised his hand again. Several fire spears fell into the void and disappeared in a flash. Almost at the same time, several plum blossoms disappeared where the fire spears landed. Miserable shrieks rang out in the air as several literary saints appeared in the void. Each of them had a fire spear stabbed into their chest. Although the fire spears were not enough to kill the literary saints on the spot, the six-colored spiritual fire ignited their true chi and bodies. Even the surrounding void was about to be ignited. Ha! The thunderbolt Immortal laughed. I'll send these eyesores back to their hometown first. Then I'll tell you what elegance is. Huff. At this time, Baiming Cho Qing's huge hand fell. Where the true chi fell, the six-colored spiritual fire did not extinguish. Instead, it went against the flow and ignited Baiming Cho Qing's huge hand. Damn it. Baiming Cho Qing was shocked. She cursed and decisively cut her wrist. With a swoosh, she threw the huge hand away. Just as Baiming Cho Qing was about to use another magical power, Dongfang Qionghao's voice came from afar. Baiming Cho Qing glared at the thunderbolt Immortal fiercely. Her figure turned into a plum blossom shadow and disappeared instantly. The thunderbolt Immortal shouted disdainfully. She really has no manners. She escaped without even saying goodbye. Then, the thunderbolt Immortal did not even look at the literary sages who were burned by the spiritual fire and chased after them. In order to avoid Baiming Cho Qing's winter plum forbidden lightning diagram, Dongfang Qionghao's figure flickered and lured Wenchu to another high altitude. At this moment, Chao Muya's heavenly light split in two, and the sky was once again covered in a faint greenish gray. Layers of earth, fire, wind and lightning roared in the sky, and the clouds that approached Chao Muya were shattered into pieces. Wenchu landed and looked at Dongfang Qiionghao, who was on guard in the distance. His eyes flashed with worry. He looked around and sighed. We Confucians have written many poems. Other than Immortals at the Magpie Bridge, this old man likes Song of Tomorrow the most. Then, Wenchu didn't dare to look at Dongfang Qionghao's confusion. He started to recite. Tomorrow comes after tomorrow, how many tomorrows are there? I am waiting for tomorrow, and all things are wasted. If the people of the world are tired by tomorrow, spring will pass and autumn will come, and the old will come. In the morning he looked at the east flowing water, in the evening he looked at the west setting sun. How much could tomorrow be in 100 years? Please listen to my song of tomorrow. When he finished reciting, Wenchu continued, looking at Chao Muya, this old man suddenly feels that time is passing quickly. Day after day, day after day, day after day, day after day. A day is but a blink of an eye. How much time is there in a person's life? Why do we not do meaningful things and only do boring things? Dongfang Qiionghao naturally didn't know that Wenchu's feelings had just been born, and he was looking at the world with his own ignorant eyes. However, when he saw that Wenchu didn't make a move, he waved his hand, and the literary sages disappeared and landed in various places. The master of Wenchu Palace is quite refined. Dongfang Qiionghao smiled. Although this old man has never seen you before, I know that you are a refined person after seeing you today. You are completely different from that bastard Gaochen. However, to be honest, I, Jian Zhong, and the others might not be any better than Gaochen. Perhaps we were like you in our early years, and we used to make tea with clear spring water and red mud to make wine. However, now that we are in your position, we have already treated our previous lives as our ideal. At this point, Dongfang Qiionghao sighed. Actually, sometimes this old man also wants to be like you, to throw away these shackles, or to find a desolate mountain to cultivate in peace, or to find Gaochen to become the master of some palace and live a leisurely life. However, if this old man takes half a step back, others will take a step forward. My Dongfang family's thousands of years of foundation may become someone else's. This old man has taken over this heavy responsibility from my ancestors, and I can't slack off. My fate has already been decided when I took over the position of master. To be honest, this old man doesn't think that the four great families will win today's battle. Wenchu retracted his gaze and looked at the disciples who were fighting beneath his feet. He said, You don't know enlightened Master Zhao's background at all. Don't you think that it's not worth it to make both sides suffer for the 5 Qis unification art? There are some things that must be done. Even if the price is high, this old man will still do it. Dongfang Qianghao replied. However, there are some things that cannot be done. Even if there is no price, this old man will not do them. The 5 cheese unification art is extremely important to our 4 clans. We must obtain it at all costs. Wen Chu sneered. If this old man told you that you didn't need to do so much, you wouldn't need to set up such a trap. This old man already told you when I gave the 5 cheese unification art to Immortal Emperor Gaochen. I'm returning it to the Confucian cultivators, not the Immortal palaces. It won't be long before the 5 cheese unification art is made public on hidden Immortal continent. Dongfang Qianghao was stunned and did not say anything for a long time. He stared at Wen Chu as if he was thinking about the validity of Wen Chu's words. However, Dongfang Qianghao spoke again. I believe your words. However, I don't believe the Gaochen. Or rather, I don't believe that the Gaochen would give the 5 cheese unification art to our 4 clans and the 100 schools of philosophers for no reason. Moreover, I can tell you with certainty that if you don't make the 5 cheese unification art public, then your so-called return of the 5 cheese unification art to the Confucian cultivators is nothing more than a joke. You're only using the 5 cheese unification art to give yourself the title of Confucian Immortal Master, the Master of the Literature Star Palace. Wen Chu shrugged helplessly. This is all I can do. You can do even more. Dongfang Qianghao smiled. You can give the 5 cheese unification art to our 4 clans and work together with us. Dongfang Qianghao hesitated for a moment before continuing. I can even promise you that if possible, our 4 clans can recommend you to be the Immortal Emperor of the Immortal Palaces. Wen Chu knew that Dongfang Qianghao was trying to bewitch him. He shook his head. How can I be the Immortal Emperor with my temperament? If I wanted to, why would I give the 5 cheese unification art to Immortal Emperor Gaochen? Dongfang Qianghao remained silent. Wen Chu pondered for a moment before continuing. When I gave the 5 cheese unification art to Immortal Emperor Gaochen, we had an agreement. That's why I can't give the 5 cheese unification art to the 4 clans. However, if the 4 clans agree, I'll discuss it with Taoist Master Xiao and come up with a foolproof plan. Although Wen Chu didn't say that Xiaohua could give the 5 cheese unification technique to the 4 great families, Dongfang Qianghao knew from Dongfang Yushan that Xiaohua also knew the 5 cheese unification technique, so he understood. However, Dongfang Qianghao rejected Wen Chu's offer and shook his head. There's no turning back now. Unless Taoist Master Xiao hands over the 5 cheese unification art now. That's why. Wen Chu smiled wryly. Even if you know this is Immortal Emperor Gaochen's plan, you still have to step in. Yes. There are many things in this world that are beyond one's control. Dongfang Qianghao nodded. Just like now, I know you're a gentleman and want to befriend you, but I still have to think of a way to capture you. As he spoke, Dongfang Qianghao slapped the top of his head, and a large, crystal-clear, multicolored hand appeared out of thin air and grabbed at him. Wen Chu also unleashed a 5-colored hand. Although the hand was not solid, its color was pure, and as it passed, Dongfang Qianghao's shackles were swept away. Wen Chu sighed. When it comes to Confucian techniques, are no match for me. Boom. Wen Chu's hand clashed with Dongfang Qianghao's. Under the huge force, Dongfang Qianghao's hand crumbled into pieces of runes while Wen Chu's hand was still there and quickly restored. Dongfang Qianghao wasn't surprised at all. He narrowed his eyes and said, It's too early to talk about this. Sure enough, at the place where the 5-colored hands landed, a green bamboo shoot appeared. Puff! Dongfang Qianghao's true qi flowed into the bamboo shoot and it suddenly turned into a huge bamboo tree. It was green and glistening. This is. Wen Chu didn't understand. The hand that hadn't recovered reached out again. Wherever Wen Chu's large hand landed, the bamboo swiftly turned into a grayish-yellow color. Numerous pale yellow bamboo flowers slowly grew on them. Once these bamboo flowers were revealed, inscriptions suddenly appeared in the previously untraceable sky. These inscriptions faded under the pale yellow color of the bamboo flowers, transforming into numerous colorless bamboo flowers. A faint aura of death quickly spread around. Wen Chu raised an eyebrow. He seemed to understand something. Whoosh! Tens of thousands of colorless flowers suddenly bloomed, and Wen Chu's hand withered. All of his true qi flowed into the flowers. At the same time, the aura of death surged towards Wen Chu like a tidal wave. Wen Chu activated his true qi, and the five-colored light quickly faded under the aura of death. The inscriptions were wiped out by the aura of death. Give it a tip, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46-22. Your Excellency, there's no need to struggle. Only by handing over the 5 cheese unifications will you be able to avoid becoming a skeleton. Dongfang Qianghao said with pride, otherwise, only death awaits you. Wen Chu let out a long laugh and pointed at the blooming bamboo flowers and the surging death aura. He said in a clear voice, although the blooming of bamboo represents the withering of bamboo, it is still the birth of bamboo flowers and the birth of new bamboo. We Confucian cultivators focus on life. We cultivate the power of life. You don't understand, you've gone astray. You only see death and ignore life. How can this kind of death trap this old man? As he spoke, Wen Chu opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of refined life energy from his danton. Whoosh! Like a spring breeze, the entire space was immediately filled with layers of bright green. In this bright green aura, all the death energy seemed to be boiling and bubbling. In just a moment, all the bubbles fell into the light yellow bamboo flowers. The bamboo flowers disappeared, and one by one, thumb-sized bamboo shoots were revealed. Dongfang Qianghao sucked in a cold breath. He knew he had underestimated Wen Chu's Confucian divine abilities. Wen Chu's hand was still alive, and his hand was still alive. His hand touched the bamboo shoots and withered flowers. Dongfang Qianghao knew he had underestimated Wen Chu's divine ability. Sigh. Dongfang Qianghao sighed again. He took out an ancient ruler and said, actually, this old man really didn't want to come to this step. As he spoke, Dongfang Qianghao waved the ruler. A stern and heavy aura came from the ruler. Along with this aura, there was the sound of tens of thousands of children chanting. It was as if the entire world had become a huge school. When Chu became a student in this school, the ferrule slowly fell down, and countless inscriptions flew out from the ferrule. They flashed in the air and made a sound. A voice that resounded through the heavens and earth rang out amidst the chanting of the 10,000 children. A teacher teaches and dispels doubts. The moment this voice came out, the chanting stopped abruptly. This voice was like all living beings bowing their heads. As a Confucian cultivator, Wen Chu felt an irresistible silence in his heart. He was about to bow his head before this respectful teacher. The ruler fell down like a mountain and was about to land on Wen Chu's forehead. At this critical moment, Wen Chu's head spat out 5-colored qi. The heaven and earth pagoda flew out and blocked the ruler. The almost unparalleled power landed on the heaven and earth pagoda. The heaven and earth pagoda roared, and a surge of heaven and earth Tao rushed out. Not only did it block the heaven and earth Tao, but the heaven and earth Tao also counterattacked Dongfang Qianghao's subbody. Dongfang Qianghao's subbody was destroyed. Heaven and earth pagoda? How do you have such a wondrous item? Dongfang Qianghao's face was pale as he looked at the heaven and earth pagoda above Wen Chu's head in disbelief. Wen Chu sneered, "Don't you also have the Saint Ruler? Unfortunately, you used the heaven and earth Tao against my Confucian cultivator. I'm afraid you won't be able to ascend in this life." Dongfang Qianghao snorted and said, "Even if this old man's body is destroyed, I won't let you join the North Star." Roar. Dongfang Qianghao roared, and the sound waves spread in all directions. Dongfang Qianghao raised his hand, and the sound waves landed between his eyebrows. Shua! A clear light appeared between Dongfang Qianghao's eyebrows. Words flew out and formed lines of poems in the air. The lines of poems condensed into articles, and the articles condensed into scrolls. When the scrolls opened, a soft voice sounded. Although the voice was soft, it was deafening to Wen Chu's ears. Wen Chu was confused at first, but when the voice recited a few lines, Wen Chu's forehead shone with a clear light. Wen Chu suddenly realized what was going on. However, before Wen Chu could do anything, 4 distorted figures flashed in the sky. Shimen Jianzhong, Nangong Tianji, and Baiming Chuqing arrived at the same time. The three of them stood in the air and raised their hands to point at their own forehead. Similar clear light spurted out and shrouded the surrounding hundreds of miles. 4 layers of clear light fell, and another strange phenomenon appeared. In the sky within hundreds of miles, endless auspicious clouds and multicolored light appeared. Within the auspicious clouds and multicolored light, there seemed to be many illusory figures. Behind these illusory figures, there were all kinds of strange phenomena, such as dragons and phoenixes, abundant grains, picturesque territories, and so on. Xiaohua, the thunderbolt immortal, and the celestial being naturally chased after them. However, this clear light was so mysterious that not only did it block the figures of Xiaohua and the others, even their divine senses couldn't penetrate it. Damn it. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and cursed in a low voice. He raised his hand and patted the top of his head. A 5-colored big hand was about to grab him. Boom. Just at this time, a huge vibration occurred in the sky. Like a huge wave, a fluctuation emerged from the clear light. Xiaohua's 5-colored big hand was instantly shaken into powder. When the light became clear again, the hidden clouds had already disappeared, revealing the situation inside. At this time, inside the clear light, 4 voices recited the scrolls at the same time. The voices were different, and the accents were different. However, where the voices fell, the scrolls began to gather, vibrate, and transform. The mountain of books and the sea of literature swayed, and 4 similar but actually different Wenchu stars were born from the scrolls. These stars looked somewhat blurry and even somewhat broken, but the Wenchu aura inside the stars was very strong. Disciple respectfully invites the sage. The 4 family heads bowed at the same time. Another pillar of 5-colored true energy mixed with essence blood fell into the Wenchu star. Ka-ka-ka-ka. 4 clear shattering sounds came from the sky. As the 4 Wenchu stars shattered, 4 sages with only half of their bodies were revealed. The moment this saint appeared, tens of thousands of auspicious clouds covered the sky, and thousands of rays of light shone. The sound of the 100 heavy suns rang out, and 10 thunderbolts descended. In this saint's hand, there was another beautiful ink brush. Seeing this, Xiaohua, who was about to use his divine ability again, smiled. He crossed his arms and coldly stood there, quietly watching. When the 4 sages appeared, Dongfang Qianghao looked at Shimin Jianzhong. The 2 of them exchanged glances and their bodies moved. As the 2 of them moved, the 2 sages above their heads merged and formed a complete sage. Xiaohua, who was originally hugging the scrolls to watch the show, suddenly trembled and cried out, Lao. Lao Tzu? Because in the ancient books of Confucianism, it was very clear that Lao Tzu had taught Confucius and could be said to be Confucius' teacher. However, Lao Tzu's disciples and inheritance were not found in the 100 schools of thought. Even when Wenchu became a Wenchu star, Lao Tzu's figure was not found in the sages Wenchu. Lao Tzu could be said to be a sage who had disappeared. No one knew where Lao Tzu had gone. However, at this moment, Xiaohua actually saw Lao Tzu's sage statue in this place. Xiaohua really did not expect that the so-called 4 great families were actually Lao Tzu's descendants and inheritance. Xiaohua was surprised. The 2 sages above Nangong Tianji and Baiming Chuqing's heads were also working together. As Xiaohua expected, it was another Lao Tzu's sage statue. These 2 Lao Tzu's sage statues looked exactly the same, but their auras were different. Even the holy sounds coming from their mouths and the holy brushes in their hands were different. Alas! Seeing the 2 Lao Tzu's sage statues, Wenchu sighed and said, Sins committed by the heavens can be forgiven, but sins committed by oneself are the hardest to bear. Then, Wenchu pointed at the spot between his eyebrows. Swoosh! The same strange phenomenon appeared, but the Wenchu star that rushed out of Wenchu's eyebrows was unusually clear, and even the fine lines on it were clear. Wenchu bowed and said, Disciple invites the sages to show themselves. Then, without Wenchu activating his blood essence, the sages who had experienced the sages Wenchu's sage statues in the ruins appeared again. These sages' sage statues were different. Some of them were human cultivators standing proudly with tall hats and broad belts, And some of them were human warriors standing alone in the wind with golden helmets and silver armors. In their hands, some of them were writing down historical records that had never been recorded, and some of them were writing down memories that had never been recorded in their weapons. No. No way, right? Dongfang Qianghao, Shimen Jianzhong, Nangong Tian, and Baiming Chiqing looked at each other in dismay. Their eyes were wide open, and they cried out in shock. Their mouths were opened so wide that several goose eggs could be stuffed in. At this moment, the two Lao Tzu's sage statues moved. Two ink brushes pointed at the sages, and they shouted in the air, "The Tao that can be said, is not the Tao that under the ink brushes." The sages shouted in unison, "The name that can be named, is not the name of the Hanggu Pass." As the sages chanted, the sages' brushes also pointed out. Where the inexplicable waves and light and shadow collided, the two Lao Tzu's sage statues turned into fragments. The clear light that enveloped 1,000 miles of space wrapped these fragments and returned to the spots between the eyebrows of the four clan masters. When the clear light revealed their figures, the four clan masters staggered and almost fell from the sky. They looked at Wen Chu in extreme horror, and their lips trembled. They didn't know what to say. This was because they knew very well that with the prosperity of the human race, education was hard to come by. On the hidden Immortal continent, there were many sage scholars, but very few sage scholars. This was because it was too difficult for the sages to choose Wen Chu. Even the powerful Immortal Palace and the four clan masters could only activate one sage, or even half a sage, to point out the outline of Wen Chu. Although they could step into the realm of sage scholars, the so-called sage scholars were no longer true sage scholars. They could only be called half-sage scholars, or quasi-sage scholars. Chapter 46-23. The clan masters of the four clans were not lacking in their calculations. They activated the holy statues and prepared to use two of the holy statues to kill Wen Chu's holy statue. From what they knew, Wen Chu was most likely a half-saint literary star like them. At best, he could be a complete literary star. They had two holy statues, so they had an absolute advantage. So much so that they even indulged in the wildest fantasy that even if Wen and Chu were double Saint Wen stars, their lousy holy statues were absolutely stronger than Wen and Chu's Saint Wen star. However, they never thought that Wen Chu was actually a double saint literary star. He could even be called a 10,000 saint literary star. How could their holy statues be a match for him? They had lifted a rock and smashed it on their own feet. "Ha, give me your life." Seeing this, the Celestial laughed and waved his bone spear, about to rush over. Rumble. At this moment, something strange happened again. Dark clouds appeared where the earth, fire, wind, and thunder had been. Wave after wave of darkness covered the entire sky. Within the darkness, thousands of specks of starlight came crashing down with the power of the stars and moon. Within a few thousand miles, the space was sealed. Essence energy below the 8th level was like a heavy burden. Not to mention flying, even standing in the air was difficult. Immortal Palace Star River. Immortal Palace Star River. Dongfang Qionghao's face was ferocious. He pointed at the sky and shouted crazily, "Master Shaolei, Master of Literature Palace, take a good look. This is Gao Chen's scheme, and also his dark methods. He will only hide behind the scenes and wait for us to fight to the death. Then he will come and reap the benefits." After that, Dongfang Qianghao and the other three took out their garrison orders, garrison flags, troop gathering drums, and troop collecting gongs. It seemed like they were going to collect the disciples of the four great families in the abyss. Damn it! Xiao Hua scanned with his divine sense and immediately knew that the Immortal Palace Star River not only had the Star River sand refined by the great craftsmen of the Immortal Palace Star River, but there was also the Khanate heavy water. Although this momentum was not as strong as the heavenly demon's destruction of the world in the ruins, the momentum was much stronger. Xiao Hua didn't dare to delay. He raised his hand and handed the Kunlun mirror to the Celestial. He said, "Please." "All right." The Celestial looked at the river of stars that filled the sky and poured down. With a loud roar, he took the Kunlun mirror and was about to fly down. Woo-woo. In this world, below everyone, 4 figures appeared. Dongfang Qianghao, Shimen Jianzhong, Nangong Tianji, and Baiming Chiqing's figures distorted and crashed into the void. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared. Damn it. The patriarchs of the 4 great clans actually fled at the last minute and abandoned their disciples? The Celestials stared blankly at the abyss. Most of the hundreds of thousands of disciples from the 4 great clans were injured, and none of them had been taken into the hidden weapon flag or any other imperial equipment. The Celestial didn't know what to do and shouted, "Fellow Taoist, what should we do now?" At this moment, the heavenly heavy water had already covered the sky and covered the earth. The stellar river sand carried the power of the stars as it poured down in a destructive manner. The void shattered, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. Chao Muya was once again in a state of apocalypse. "Withdraw!" Xiaohua shouted without any hesitation, "First accept Fortune Gate disciples, then the 4 families' disciples." Hearing this, the Celestial controlled the Kunlun mirror and rushed into the abyss. Xiaohua soared into the sky and shouted again, "Fellow Taoist Wen Chu, quickly summon the mountain river seal or the heaven and earth pagoda and help the Celestial to accept disciples. I will absorb the heavenly heavy water." Unfortunately, Wen Chu turned a deaf ear to Xiaohua's words and only stared at the heavenly palace galaxy with a complicated expression. "Damn it!" Xiaohua cursed inwardly. Why do things always go wrong at the crucial moment? "Fellow Taoist Celestial," Xiaohua hurriedly shouted, "quickly release fellow Taoist Feng Wu." Alright. The Celestial naturally knew that Xiaohua was trying to hide something, so he responded and casually activated the Kunlun mirror. Within the pillar of light, the phoenix parasol spread its wings and flew out. The power of the stars and moon surged out and swept towards the galaxy. At the same time, the star runes around the phoenix parasol's body appeared again. The void was torn apart and countless pillars of light descended. A huge phantom of a phoenix that was 1,000 miles long condensed on the phoenix parasol's body. As it spread its wings, the power of the stars and moon that was even more powerful than the falling galaxy rushed into the sky again. "Starry sky, great sage?" All of a sudden, a clear and melodious voice rang out in the midst of the starry night. A woman dressed in palace attire flashed past the pitch-black darkness. "Fellow Taoist lightning." Xiaohua's eyes narrowed. He swept his gaze across the galaxy and ordered, "Go and see who is causing trouble here." Don't worry." The lightning sage turned into lightning and rushed into the sky, shouting, "I love to destroy flowers." At this time, the innate heavy water had already fallen. Feng Wu used the power of the stars and moon to block the stellar river sand, but she couldn't stop the heavy water. Xiaohua released his consciousness and covered 1,000 miles, absorbing the heavy water into the Shenhua continent. The Immortal Palace's galaxy seemed to be boundless, and the stellar river sands seemed to be innumerable. Xiaohua and Feng Wu didn't dare to be careless and tried their best to collect the heavy water. The Celestial was below them, controlling the Kunlun mirror to collect the Fortune Gate's disciples who had already formed a team. The hundreds of thousands of disciples couldn't fly freely under the Immortal Palace's galaxy. Seeing the falling galaxy, they had no way to survive. Therefore, when they heard that Xiaohua was willing to save them, they hurriedly formed a team and waited for the Celestial to collect them. "Zi-la-la!" Rumbled strange noises continued to ring out in the sky above Dawn and Dusk Cliff. Space was instantly corroded by the river of stars, and then shattered by the river sand. Fortunately, the heavy water was collected by Xiaohua, and the river sand was blocked by Feng Wu. The ground wasn't destroyed anymore. Everyone was busy, and only Wen Chu was still standing quietly in the air. Her gaze was fixed on the pitch-black darkness, as if there were endless stories hidden in the darkness. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed in the pitch-black darkness, and then a clear voice shouted, "How dare you? How dare you challenge the 5th princess's honor guard?" What 5th princess and 6th princess?" The lightning Taoist's arrogant voice sounded, "I only have eyes for the 9th princess." "You're courting death." That voice was like a silver bell, and it was none other than the voice of the Jasper Flower Palace's immortal envoy, Gu Xianyun. Then, there was the sound of an overwhelming chi pillar rumbling, and then a series of miserable screams rang out. A rain of blood mixed with corpses fell from the pitch-black darkness. Hearing that it was the fifth princess, Qingqing, in the pitch-black darkness, Xiaohua sneered and said in his heart, "Injure the fifth princess and avenge Xin. Rumble." Just as Xiaohua finished speaking, he saw the lightning above the Immortal Palace's galaxy, and miserable screams rang out again. Needless to say, it was the lightning Taoist's annihilation. "How dare you injure an immortal emperor's descendant? Immortal Xiao, you violated the immortal law." At this moment, another voice came from the Immortal Palace's galaxy. Then, a general wearing an emperor's armor and a crown flashed over with a distorted figure. The general had just stood beside Xiaohua when countless chi pillars turned into chains of inscriptions and rushed out. They danced wildly around the general and swept toward Xiaohua. The master of the Supreme Purity Palace? Xiaohua's gaze fell on the general's crowned face and saw the sun, moon, and stars above the emperor's armor. How could he not know that this was one of the masters of the Three Purity Palace, the master of the Supreme Purity Palace that he had never seen before? Unfortunately, the master of the Supreme Purity Palace did not give Xiaohua a chance to speak, nor did he allow Xiaohua to resist. He stood still, raised his hand, and pulled out a sword from his waist. With a wave of his hand, the sword revealed a huge shadow and slashed toward Xiaohua. Xiaohua was shocked. Looking at the huge shadow, he sucked in a breath of cold air. The Xianyuan sword? Of course, the sword in the master of the Supreme Purity Palace was bronze in color. One side of the sword was divided into 5 sections, respectively engraved with the sun, moon, and stars. The other side was divided into 9 sections, respectively engraved with mountains, rivers, and plants. On the sword hilt, one side of the sword was engraved with farming and animal husbandry techniques, while the other side was engraved with the strategy to unify the 4 seas. As the shadow flashed, the sun, moon, and stars lingered, the mountains, rivers, and plants danced, and an unparalleled sharpness cut through the void, setting off a wave of wind whistling. Xiaohua was surprised, but he sighed again. He looked at the Fortune Gate's disciples and the 4 great families' disciples with some hesitation. At this time, he was concentrating on collecting the Khanate heavy water, so he couldn't divert his attention to fight the enemy. He couldn't even ask Taoist which to come out of the space. Because as soon as he withdrew his attention, the Khanate heavy water, which could destroy everything in the abyss below the dawn and dusk cliff, would definitely fall. At that time, not to mention the 4 great families' disciples, many of the Fortune Gate's disciples would die. Moreover, if the Khanate heavy water fell into the abyss, Xiaohua couldn't guarantee that the heaven punishment prison crystal that imprisoned Xian would be intact. Xian could also be injured. But Xiaohua gritted his teeth, not daring to withdraw his attention. He anxiously shouted in his heart, "Celestial, quickly call Taoist Witch out." "So it's you." At this time, Wen Chu, who had been standing still, suddenly spoke. He stared straight at the master of the Supreme Purity Palace and said word by word, "If you were so resolute and daring tens of thousands of years ago, how would you have let her die?" While speaking, Wen Chu suddenly opened his mouth. 9 sword intents flew out. The moment the sword intents touched the ground, they turned into 9 flying swords. They whimpered as they flew towards the Xianyuan sword's shadow in the shape of 9 stars. Wherever the sword light passed, cold light flashed like falling tears. The sound of swords rang out, and the whimpering sound was like mournful sobs. What was extremely strange was that when the 9 stars reached the Xianyuan sword's shadow, they turned into a flexible sword. As this flexible sword danced, it gave birth to a peerless sword's splendor. The figure of a fairy flickered within the sword's splendor, and a kind of sword intent that was as rich as the grace of a beauty and as chaotic as the sorrow of a beauty turned into flowing water and crashed into the shadow without hesitation. Chapter 46-24. Pear Blossom, Pear Blossom, Pear Blossom. All of a sudden, the master of Shangqing Palace shouted. His body, which was brimming with true qi, trembled violently. The shadow of the Xianyuan sword, which was chopping down with all his strength, unexpectedly stopped in midair. The shadow of the Xinyuan sword only stopped for a moment, but the sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, and vegetation all turned into fragments. The Xinyuan sword in the master of Shangqing Palace's hand flashed with a bronze sword light. This sword light was the result of him forcibly withdrawing his true qi. The sword light was like water, falling back into the body of the master of Shangqing Palace. Boom! A loud sound burst from the surface of the master of Shangqing Palace's body. The crown of the master of Shangqing Palace's crown flew away, revealing the true appearance of the master of Shangqing Palace. Li Xiubai? Xiao Hua looked at the appearance of the master of Shangqing Palace and was stunned on the spot. Wasn't this the appearance of Li Xiubai's corpse that Xiao Hua saw in the sword cave in the Mo Zhao Black Forest? Damn it, what the hell is going on? Xiao Hua groaned, his mind confused. The master of Shangqing Palace didn't pay attention to anything else, only staring at the peerless sword brilliance. Although he had put away the sword in time, how powerful was the Xianyuan sword? How powerful was the 9 stars transit? When the two collided, it was only a moment, but the figure of the beautiful fairy, the unending and chaotic emotions, had already dimmed. Pear Blossom. The master of Shangqing Palace muttered weakly, as if he couldn't even pick up the Xianyuan sword. You. She has already fallen. Wen Chu said faintly from the side, in these 9 sword pills, only some of her grief was left. Now that she has come here again, that grief has also dissipated. Everything began here, and it would also end here. Day and night, it's all yearning cliff. Looking at the fairy's figure turning into smoke, the master of Shangqing Palace suddenly reached out, as if he wanted to grab something. However, where his fingers landed, the smoke was disturbed. Not only did the fairy's figure disappear, but the smoke also turned into nothingness. Tears fell from the eyes of the master of Shangqing Palace. He asked softly, when she was in the 9 stars sword pill, did she complain? The master of the Shangqing Palace looked like he was asking Wen Chu, but his gaze pierced through the void. It was as though he was looking at himself from tens of thousands of years ago. He had knelt powerlessly beside the Immortal Palace's galaxy and watched as the Pear Blossom Fairy was killed by the Immortal Palace's galaxy. The gentle, water-like sword that had split the Immortal Palace's galaxy into 2 was shattered by the Star River sand and turned into a sword pill that fell into the void crack that suddenly appeared. Wen Chu didn't answer the palace master. He only closed his eyes as tears dripped down. After half a cup of tea's time, Wen Chu opened his eyes again. At this time, Wen Chu was neither happy nor sad. The tears at the corner of his eyes slowly disappeared as he said, I don't know if she is complaining or not. I only know that there's a poem inside the 9 stars sword pill. See I? The eyes of the master of Shangqing Palace lit up. He asked with some fear and some expectation, what see I? The delicate clouds are skillful, the flying stars transmit hatred, and the silver river travels in secret. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it triumphs over countless mortals. Gentle as water, the auspicious day is like a dream, enduring the Magpie Bridge and returning home. If 2 people's feelings last for a long time, why should they be together day and night? Haha, I understand. The master of Shangqing Palace suddenly laughed wildly. Pear Blossom, oh Pear Blossom, you finally understand my difficulties. Have finally forgiven me. Day and night, night and night. Our hearts are in the same place. Which part of us isn't day and night? Boom. As the voice of the master of Shangqing Palace fell, a huge roar sounded again. Countless pillars of qi appeared out of thin air and turned into a huge hole that rushed into the top of the master of Shangqing Palace's head. At the same time, an extremely strange law descended from the sky and very vaguely entered Wen Chu's body. In Wen Chu's eyes, happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, and sorrow were like dazzling colors that appeared and disappeared 9 times in an instant. Then, Wen Chu slightly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was with a kind of sympathy. This change was very subtle. Only the muddle-headed Xiao Hua suddenly felt as if he was missing something. He hurriedly looked at Wen Chu, and the corner of Xiao Hua's mouth formed a trace of a smile. Congratulations, Master of Shangqing Palace. After several breaths, the pillar of qi emitted a bright light. A scholarly cultivator wearing an emperor's golden armor descended from the sky. Wasn't this the Master of Taiqing Palace? After the Master of Taiqing Palace landed, he raised his hand and took the crown of the Master of Shangqing Palace. He smiled and handed it to the Master of Shangqing Palace. Congratulations, Master of Shangqing Palace. The knot in your heart is gone, and the day of your ascension is just around the corner. Congratulations to you, congratulations to you. The Master of Shangqing Palace took the crown but didn't put it on. Instead, he looked at the Master of Literature Palace and said, I still have to thank you for this matter. Not bad. The Master of Taiqing Palace nodded and patted his head. The brilliance of the crown also disappeared, revealing his true appearance. Immortal Bright Sword? Although Xiao Hua had already expected this, when he saw that the Master of Taiqing Palace really was Immortal Bright Sword, Xiao Hua couldn't help but groan. Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword could be regarded as Xiao Hua's master. Xiao Hua not only obtained the inheritance of sword cultivation from Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword in Mo Zhao Black Forest, but also obtained the Sword Heart Energy Seed Technique and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening Technique. At the same time, it was also because of the Sword Heart Energy Seed Art and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening Art that Xiao Hua had the original intention of dividing his primordial spirit. Later on, Xiao Hua obtained the Ghost Cultivator's Inextricable Threads Art by chance. Only then did he truly try to divide his primordial spirit and create a complete primordial spirit. Later on, Xiao Hua had a great fortune and obtained the demon race's external incarnation art. He even obtained the heavenly devil essence from the upper realm's ruins and cultivated into a true primordial spirit, allowing each primordial spirit to become a real person. But in the end, Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword's Sword Heart Energy Seed Technique and Primordial Spirit Strengthening Technique were the most fundamental origins of the Fortune Gate's 10 Masters. Looking at the familiar faces of the Masters of Taiqing Palace and Shangqing Palace, Xiao Hua's doubts in the past finally settled. In the past, when Xiao Hua obtained these two seemingly heaven-defying techniques, he was really puzzled. After all, these techniques couldn't be comprehended unless one was an almighty expert. Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword were merely nascent soul cultivators, so how could they have created such powerful techniques? What was special was that on the Dawn Rain continent, there were no other sects that cultivated these mysterious techniques. Even Immortal Bright Sword's Changbai sect and Li Xiubai's Flame Bamboo Sword sect didn't know about them. Only Xiao Hua obtained their inheritance. This was obviously illogical. At that time, Xiao Hua thought that the cultivators who cultivated these two secret techniques had died due to qi deviation. Only now did he understand that Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword weren't cultivators of the Dawn Rain continent. Their techniques might not have been passed down to their two sections. Only the Immortal Palace's Dual Purity Palace Master could have created such a miraculous primordial spirit splitting technique, right? Of course. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua had another realization. The Sword Heart Energy Seed Technique and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening Technique might not have been created by Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword. Perhaps they were techniques that originally existed on the hidden Immortal Continent, or even the 3 continents. Xiao Hua's mind was full of thoughts. In just a moment, he immediately woke up and hurriedly told his experience to Wen Chu through his mind. At this time, the Taiqing Palace Master looked at Wen Chu with a smile and said meaningfully, previously, this old man was very surprised. Whether it was from the Immortal Palace's records or our inference, we couldn't find your origin. If you said that you came from the outside world, your techniques are exactly the same as our Confucian cultivators. Only now did this old man know that you came from that place. Wen Chu nodded and bowed to the Taiqing Palace Master and the Taiqing Palace Master. This disciple was lucky enough to obtain the legacy of the 2 seniors in the Mo Zhao Black Forest. All these years, I have always been grateful for the 2 seniors' gifts. Today, seeing you, please accept this disciple's master's salute. At this time, Wen Chu's strength had already surpassed the Tai Ching Palace Master and the Tai Ching Palace Master. The Tai Ching Palace Master's previous words were just to get closer to them. They didn't expect Wen Chu to actually salute them as master and disciple. This was a salute from the Wen Chu Palace Master. It was also a salute from a Confucian cultivator. The two were already frightened and wanted to quickly raise their hands to support Wen Chu. Unfortunately, under Wen Chu's insistence, how could the Tai Ching Palace Master resist? The two were surprised but also somewhat helpless and happy. They were surprised because Wen Chu's strength was really powerful. They immediately felt that Wen Chu's true qi was like an ocean, surging and endless. The two were helpless because with this salute, Wen Chu's previous master and disciple relationship had actually ended. Wen Chu didn't have any special karma with them anymore. The two were happy because although Wen Chu's master and disciple relationship had ended, Wen Chu's salute itself showed that he respected his master. This kind of affection couldn't be replaced by simple calculations. The ancients said that if 3 people walk together, there will always be a teacher. The Tai Ching Palace Master smiled and said, "The Wen Chu Palace Master is too rigid. Before, we might have been your master. Now, the one who has achieved is the master. You are the master of us Confucian cultivators. We also want to salute you." With that, the two also pretended to salute. Wen Chu smiled and said, "You salute me, I salute you. When will it end?" Tai Ching Palace Master, there are 2 other immortal friends who are resisting the Celestial Palace's Milky Way. The Tai Ching Palace Master didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master and asked with a smile, "What do you think?" I have a knot in my heart. Setting up this Milky Way formation can be considered as fulfilling my promise to the Celestial Palace. As for whether the Milky Way formation can kill people, it's not something I can control. The Tai Ching Palace Master laughed and said, "Of course, I can't accept the Milky Way formation. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble the Wen Chu Palace Master to do it personally."